Penn State's Forgotten Predator, 1978. Before Jerry Sandusky ever became a household name, Penn State already had a predator hiding within its football program. In 1978, linebacker Todd Hodney was a member of Joe Paterno's team. On the field, he barely made an impact. Off the field, he left scars that would last a lifetime. Hodney embarked on a violent spree of sexual assaults against women near campus. Authorities later described him as the most dangerous, physically imposing, and ruthless criminal they had ever encountered. His victims included students, young mothers, and women just walking home at night, all terrorized while Penn State football kept rolling toward national relevance. Hodney was eventually expelled from the team, but not before dozens of women had been attacked. After leaving Penn State, his crimes escalated. He was convicted of rape and years later of murder. For decades, his story was buried, overshadowed by Penn State's glory, years on the field, and later by the Sandusky scandal that defined the program's darkest chapter. When ESPN revisited Hodney's story more than 40 years later, it revealed a haunting truth. The warning signs had been there, but no one acted with the urgency needed to stop him. The program's silence left countless victims to suffer while football marched on. Northwestern's hazing disaster, 2023. In the summer of 2023, Northwestern, and university, better known for academics than athletics, found itself at the center of one of college football's ugliest scandals. It started with whispers about hazing inside the Wildcats' locker room, but what came out publicly painted a disturbing picture of systemic abuse. An internal investigation found a pattern of problematic conduct stretching across years. Former players described hazing rituals that included coerced sexual acts, degrading punishments, and forced nude drills. The allegations were shocking, not only for their cruelty, but also for how normalized they had become inside the program. According to reports, some coaches allegedly signaled when hazing rituals were supposed to happen, while team leaders enforced them as a twisted rite of passage. What began as tradition crossed the line into humiliation and abuse, creating a culture where young players felt trapped, powerless to speak out for fear of being ostracized. At first, the university tried to quietly resolve it. Head coach Pat Fitzgerald, a Northwestern legend, was handed only a 2-week suspension. But when the graphic details leaked to the press, the outrage was immediate. Within days, Fitzgerald was fired after 17 years as head coach, and Northwestern's proud football reputation was in ruins. The scandal raised larger questions too. How could such toxic behavior persist for so long in a program celebrated for discipline and academics? It became a reminder that hazing isn't confined to small-time programs or obscure teams. Even elite universities can harbor a dark underbelly when accountability slips. Maryland's Deadly Workouts, 2018. In May 2018, the University of Maryland football program was shaken by a tragedy that should never have happened. During a grueling off-season conditioning session in the heat, 19-year-old offensive lineman Jordan McNair collapsed. Trainers initially treated it as simple exhaustion, but McNair wasn't just tired. He was in the early stages of heat stroke. For over an hour, his body temperature rose unchecked. Investigations later revealed the staff failed to administer the most basic and life-saving treatment, cold water immersion. By the time McNair was transported to the hospital, it was too late. He died 2 weeks later from complications of heat stroke. The aftermath was damning. Reports described a toxic culture under head coach DJ Durkin, one where players were driven through punishing workouts in a climate of fear. Speaking up meant being labeled weak, and even medical distress wasn't taken seriously. McNair's death wasn't just tragic, it was labeled preventable. The fallout was immediate and national. Durkin was placed on leave and eventually fired. Maryland's president publicly apologized to McNair's family. The university accepted full responsibility and later reached a $3.5 million settlement with his parents. But the deeper impact was bigger than Maryland. The incident forced college football to re-examine its training practices. The NCAA and athletic programs across the country implemented stricter workout protocols, emphasizing player safety and medical oversight. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Notre Dame Tower Tragedy, 2010. On October 27, 2010, Notre Dame suffered a tragedy that had nothing to do with the field itself, but everything to do with the choices surrounding football. Declan Sullivan was a 20-year-old student videographer tasked with filming football practice. On that day, winds in South Bend were dangerously high, gusting over 50 miles per hour. Despite weather warnings, Sullivan was sent up on a scissor lift above the practice field to get overhead shots. As practice went on, the lift swayed violently. Sullivan tweeted from his phone, clearly terrified. "I guess I've lived long enough. This is terrifying." Minutes later, the lift toppled. Sullivan was killed when it crashed to the ground. Investigations afterward found Notre Dame had ignored repeated warnings about the high winds. There were no safety measures in place to prevent a student worker from being put in such danger. The state of Indiana fined the university for safety violations, and the decision-making of head coach Brian Kelly and other administrators came under heavy scrutiny. The university eventually reached a settlement with Sullivan's family, but the damage was irreversible. His death was not the result of a violent hit or an on-field accident. It was the result of negligence, a choice to prioritize practice footage over basic safety. The Seberg suicide at Notre Dame, 2010. Just weeks after Declan Sullivan's death, Notre Dame faced another tragedy tied to its football program, one that raised even deeper questions about how the school protected its athletes versus how it protected its students. Elizabeth Lizzie Seberg was a 19-year-old student at nearby St. Mary's College. In August 2010, she reported to campus police that she had been sexually assaulted by a Notre Dame football player. The days that followed were filled with fear. Seberg received threatening text messages from another player, warning her not to pursue the complaint. "Don't do anything you would regret." 10 days later, Lizzie Seberg died by suicide. The handling of the case drew immediate outrage. Campus police didn't interview the accused player until 15 days after Lizzie filed her report, and 5 days after her death. No charges were filed. Her parents later said they felt shut out by the university and misled about the progress of the investigation. To many observers, it looked like Notre Dame had prioritized protecting its football program over the life of a young woman. The tragedy became a rallying point in conversations about how universities address sexual assault, especially when athletes are involved. The imbalance of power, the delays in investigation, and the lack of transparency all left the impression of a system stacked against victims. The Booster from Hell, Miami's Nevin Shapiro, 2011. Few scandals in college football ever reached the level of salacious detail that came out of Miami in 2011. At the center of it all was Nevin Shapiro, a flashy South Florida businessman who ran a $930 million Ponzi scheme. While defrauding investors, he was also funneling millions into the Hurricanes football program as its self-proclaimed biggest booster. For nearly a decade, Shapiro provided Miami players with everything NCAA rules forbade: cash handouts, nightclub tabs, yacht parties, luxury hotel suites, jewelry, and even prostitutes. He once bragged about paying for an abortion for a player's girlfriend. According to Shapiro, as many as 72 players received improper benefits from him during the 2000s. He turned Miami's nightlife into an extension of the program, with VIP sections at clubs reserved for his players, stocked with champagne and attention. Players drove cars financed by Shapiro, stayed in his mansions, and lived like celebrities. To him, it wasn't just support, it was access. He wanted to be in the locker room, on the sidelines, and part of the Hurricanes' swagger. When his Ponzi scheme collapsed, Shapiro was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. From behind bars, he turned whistleblower, airing every detail of his decade-long relationship with Miami football. The NCAA launched an investigation, and while they couldn't prove every allegation, the damage was done. Miami imposed self-sanctions, including 2 bowl bans, and lost scholarships. The Hurricanes' reputation, once defined by dominance, became tainted by corruption. The Nevin Shapiro saga wasn't just a case of a rogue booster, it was a reminder of how easily the hunger for money, influence, and success can corrupt a program. Auburn players gunned down, 2012. On June 9, 2012, Auburn University was rocked by a tragedy that left the football community stunned. At an off-campus pool party near the school, An argument escalated into a shooting that claimed the lives of 2 former Auburn players and injured a current one. Ladarius Phillips and Ed Christian, both former Auburn linemen, were killed, while Eric Mack, a current offensive lineman, was critically wounded but survived. The shooter, a 22-year-old man with a violent history, opened fire after a dispute that reportedly started over a woman. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with dozens of students fleeing for cover as shots rang out. The suspect fled and sparked a manhunt that lasted several days before he surrendered to police. He was later convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. The murders sent shockwaves through Auburn, a school still basking in the glow of its 2010 national championship. Candlelight vigils drew thousands, with coaches and teammates struggling to process how their community could lose young men so suddenly to senseless violence. The Marshall plane crash, 1970. On November 14, 1970, college football suffered its darkest day. Marshall University's football team had just played an away game at East Carolina and was flying home to Huntington, West Virginia. On board the chartered Southern Airways DC-9 were 75 people, players, coaches, staff, boosters, and flight crew. As the plane approached Tri-State Airport on a rainy, foggy night, it clipped trees just short of the runway. The aircraft slammed into a hillside and exploded. Every single person on board was killed. Among the dead were 36 Marshall players, 9 coaches, 25 boosters, and 5 crew members. The crash devastated Huntington. Families lost sons, fathers, and brothers all at once. The entire core of the Marshall football program was wiped out. University officials even considered shutting the program down altogether. The grief was that overwhelming, but in the end, Marshall chose to rebuild. With the help of students, walk-ons, and transfers from other schools, the Thundering Herd fielded a team the following season. Though they struggled on the field for years afterward, the decision to keep playing became a symbol of resilience. The tragedy was later memorialized in the film We Are Marshall, but no movie can fully capture the pain of an entire team and community gone in an instant. The 1970 Marshall plane crash remains perhaps the most haunting moment in college football history, a story of unthinkable loss, and of a university and town that somehow found a way to carry on. UVA shooting on campus, 2022. On November 13, 2022, the University of Virginia experienced one of the darkest tragedies in college football history. A group of students, including several football players, were returning to campus on a charter bus after a class trip. What should have been an ordinary Sunday night turned into horror. A former UVA player, also a student at the university, allegedly opened fire on the bus. 3 football players, Lavelle Davis Jr., Devin Chandler, and Deshaun Perry, were killed. 2 other students were wounded. The attack was sudden and shocking, leaving their teammates and classmates traumatized. The shooter fled, sparking a tense 12-hour campus lockdown while police searched for him. He was eventually arrested the following morning, but by then, the Charlottesville community was in mourning. Candlelight vigils drew thousands of people. Teammates, coaches, and family members spoke of the 3 victims not just as athletes, but as beloved sons, brothers, and friends. In the weeks that followed, details emerged that the shooter had been on UVA's radar for prior behavioral and weapon-related issues. That only deepened the sense of frustration and disbelief. How could warning signs have been missed? And how could such violence erupt within a close-knit team environment? The remainder of Virginia's football season was canceled, an acknowledgement that there were bigger things than games to be addressed. The university instead turned its focus toward grieving, honoring the players' legacies, and healing as a community. Northern Colorado's murderous punter, 2006. In 2006, Northern Colorado University, a small program that rarely made national headlines, suddenly became infamous for a crime that sounded more like a tabloid story than a sports headline. Mitch Kozad, a backup punter desperate to earn the starting job, decided the only way to move up the depth chart was to eliminate his competition. One night in September, starting punter Rafael Mendoza was walking to his car in a dark campus parking lot when a masked attacker ambushed him. Mendoza was stabbed in his kicking leg, the very leg he used to punt. He survived, though badly wounded, and investigators quickly zeroed in on Kozad. The motive was as bizarre as it was chilling. He wanted the starting spot so badly that he literally tried to disable his rival. The case became national news, and Kozad was soon dubbed the punter who stabbed his competition. In 2007, he was convicted of second-degree assault, though the jury deadlocked on the more serious attempted murder charge, and sentenced to prison. Mendoza, meanwhile, eventually recovered but never regained his starting role at Northern Colorado. For a program that had little national visibility, the crime cast a long shadow. It exposed the extreme pressures and warped priorities that can emerge in even the smallest corners of college football. A position battle that should have been settled on the practice field instead turned into a true crime story that stained Northern Colorado's name. Army's cheating catastrophe, 1951. In 1951, one of the most respected institutions in America, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, was brought to its knees by a scandal that shattered both its football program and its honor code. That year, it was revealed that 90 cadets, including 37 football players, had systematically cheated on exams. At West Point, the honor code was sacred. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. The scandal showed just how far some were willing to go to keep star athletes on the field. Cadets had been circulating stolen exam answers and recycled test questions. Tutors were suspected of helping athletes bend rules, and the culture around the football team had allowed the cheating to spread unchecked. When the truth came out, the punishment was unprecedented. Every cadet involved was expelled. The impact on Army football was immediate and devastating. Just years earlier, the Black Knights had been a national powerhouse, producing legends like Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis. But with nearly the entire varsity roster dismissed, the 1951 team stumbled to a 2-7 record. What had once been a symbol of discipline and excellence became a cautionary tale. The scandal also shook the public's faith in West Point itself. Congress debated whether football had compromised the academy's mission, with some even calling for the program to be suspended entirely. Ultimately, Army football survived, but the cribbing scandal scarred its reputation for decades. Woody Hayes' sideline assault, 1978. Woody Hayes was already a legend by the late 1970s, the face of Ohio State football, a Hall of Fame coach with 5 national championships, and a fiery personality who commanded both fear and respect. But on December 29, 1978, his legendary career ended in one shocking moment during the Gator Bowl. With 2 minutes left in a tense game against Clemson, Ohio State quarterback Art Schlichter threw an interception. Clemson's Charlie Bauman picked off the pass and was tackled along the Buckeyes' sideline. As Bauman got to his feet, Woody Hayes, furious and unable to control his temper, grabbed the opposing player by the jersey and punched him in the throat. The punch was caught by TV cameras and replayed across the country. Players and coaches rushed in to separate the melee, but the damage was done. Hayes, a 65-year-old icon of the sport, had struck an opposing student athlete on live television. The very next morning, Ohio State officials fired him. After 28 years as head coach, his career ended not with a championship or a farewell, but with disgrace. The incident became one of the most infamous coaching meltdowns in sports history. It overshadowed Clemson's 17-15 victory and permanently scarred Hayes' legacy. Though remembered for his brilliance and success, he's equally remembered for the violent outburst that ended his career. 1905, football's deadliest season. In 1905, college football nearly destroyed itself. The sport was wildly popular, but brutally dangerous. With no forward pass, players clashed in violent mass formations, like the Flying Wedge, essentially turning scrimmages into organized brawls. Helmets were primitive, protective gear was minimal, and refereeing was inconsistent. That year, the violence reached a breaking point. By the end of the 1905 season, at least 19 players were dead, and another 137 seriously injured. Fatalities included skull fractures, spinal cord injuries, and internal bleeding, tragedies that often involved teenagers barely out of high school. Newspapers dubbed it a death harvest, and public opinion began to turn against the game. One emblematic incident was the death of Union College halfback Harold Moore, who died of a brain hemorrhage after being kicked in the head during a game against NYU. His death and others fueled outrage across the country, with editorials calling football gladiatorial combat in disguise. The national outcry reached the White House. President Theodore Roosevelt, an outspoken fan of the sport, convened a summit with college leaders. He gave them an ultimatum: reform the rules or risk seeing football banned altogether. The result was a series of landmark changes in 1906. The forward pass was legalized. Mass plays like the wedge were abolished. A neutral line of scrimmage was created, and more emphasis was placed on player safety. These reforms saved the sport, laying the foundation for modern football. WSU's quarterback, suicide, and CTE, 2018. In January 2018, Washington State University quarterback Tyler Hilinski was found dead in his apartment from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Just 21 years old, Hilinski had started in the Holiday Bowl weeks earlier and was widely expected to take over as the Cougars' full-time starter the following season. His death shocked teammates, fans, and the entire college football world. At first, it was a mystery. Hilinski had seemed cheerful, hardworking, and beloved by those around him. There were no obvious warning signs, but the questions grew louder. How could a young man with such promise reach such a devastating breaking point? The answers came after his family agreed to have his brain examined. The autopsy revealed Hilinski had stage 1 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the degenerative brain disease linked to repeated head trauma. Doctors were stunned. They told the family that his brain looked like that of a man decades older, possibly in his 60s. His parents have said they don't blame football alone, but they believe the disease, combined with the pressures of being a quarterback, contributed to his depression. His younger brother, Ryan, later became a quarterback at South Carolina and Northwestern, playing in his brother's honor, while also raising awareness about mental health. In the wake of Tyler's death, his family founded Hilinski's Hope, a nonprofit dedicated to ending the stigma around mental illness in athletes and improving support systems on campuses. His story became a rallying cry for more open conversations about concussions, CTE, and the invisible battles young athletes face. Minnesota's boycott and sexual assault saga, 2016. In 2016, the University of Minnesota football program was engulfed in a dark and complicated scandal that blurred the lines between justice, discipline, and loyalty. It began when a female student accused multiple Gopher players of sexually assaulting her at an off-campus party in September. Police investigated, but ultimately did not pursue criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence. However, the university launched its own Title IX investigation, and its findings told a different story. The inquiry determined that the woman's account was credible, and that at least 10 players had violated conduct codes related to sexual assault and harassment. In December, right before Minnesota was set to play in the Holiday Bowl, the university announced the suspensions of those 10 players. The team's response was explosive. Players held a press conference, announcing a full boycott of all practices and games, even threatening not to play in the bowl. They framed it as a stand for due process, claiming their teammates were punished without a fair trial in court. But then, the 82-page Title IX report was released to the public, detailing graphic allegations of group assault and corroborating parts of the victim's story. Once the disturbing details became public, the boycott crumbled. Support for the players' protest evaporated, and within 2 days, the team ended its standoff. In the end, 4 players were expelled. Others were suspended, and the program's reputation was badly damaged. The Holiday Bowl went ahead, but the scandal left a permanent stain. Penn State, Jerry Sandusky scandal, 2011. For decades, Jerry Sandusky was the face of Penn State's defensive dominance. He served as the defensive coordinator under Joe Paterno and helped build one of the most respected football legacies in college history. But beneath the surface, something horrific was unfolding. Starting as early as the 1990s, Sandusky used his nonprofit charity, The Second Mile, to gain access to underprivileged boys. He targeted them, groomed them, and in many cases, assaulted them, sometimes in Penn State facilities. Reports later showed that multiple school officials, including members of the athletic department and even head coach Joe Paterno, had been made aware of concerning behavior. But instead of reporting him to authorities, they handled it internally, quietly removing him from coaching duties, but allowing him continued access to school facilities. In 2011, a grand jury indicted Sandusky. What followed was a national firestorm. He was eventually convicted on 45 counts involving 10 different boys. Joe Paterno, who had once been considered the moral compass of college football, was fired just months before his death. The NCAA responded with historic penalties, a $60 million fine, a 4-year postseason ban, scholarship reductions, and the vacating of 111 wins, stripping Paterno of his all-time wins record. Penn State had built its image on doing things the right way, and the scandal shattered that illusion. It wasn't just a failure of oversight, it was a culture of protection, silence, and denial that allowed one man to exploit young lives for years without consequence. Even now, Penn State is still rebuilding its reputation. The statue of Paterno was removed. The wins were eventually restored, but the scars of the Sandusky case remain. SMU death penalty, 1987. In the 1980s, Southern Methodist University wasn't just a rising football powerhouse. They were a national contender, pulling in top Texas talent and beating traditional giants. But beneath their success was a pay-for-play system so blatant, so institutionalized, that it forced the NCAA to do something they had never done before and haven't done since. For years, SMU boosters and university officials paid players under the table, offering cash, cars, jobs, and housing. The NCAA already sanctioned them multiple times, including placing them on probation 5 separate times between 1974 and 1985. But the payments never stopped. In fact, they were documented. A literal payroll list existed for players, organized by school officials and alumni. When the scandal finally came to a head in 1987, the NCAA dropped the hammer. They issued the infamous death penalty, shutting down the entire SMU football program for the 1987 season. No games, no practices, no scholarships. And the school chose not to play in 1988 either, due to roster depletion. The sanctions included scholarship losses through 1990 and recruiting bans that crippled the team. The result was catastrophic. Nearly every player transferred out, coaches left, attendance cratered. It took SMU over 20 years to return to national relevance, and some argue the program never truly recovered. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. The NCAA had made an example out of SMU, but they also realized the consequences were too severe. Since then, no other Division I program has received the death penalty. Miami booster scandal, 2011. In 2011, a man named Nevin Shapiro turned the University of Miami upside down. He wasn't a coach or player. He was a convicted Ponzi schemer serving 20 years in federal prison. And from behind bars, he exposed one of the most widespread and lavish benefit scandals in college football history. Shapiro, a longtime Hurricanes booster, claimed he had provided more than 70 players with improper benefits from 2002 to 2010. His list was staggering: cash handouts, luxury yacht trips, expensive jewelry, nightclub outings, VIP access to strip clubs, and even paid encounters with prostitutes, all funded by money he had stolen in a $930 million Ponzi scheme. He embedded himself into the program. He sat courtside at games, partied with athletes, and even had his own suite at the stadium. Players called him Lil Luke, a nod to fellow Miami booster and rapper Uncle Luke. Photos surfaced of Shapiro arm in arm with stars like Willis McGahee, Vince Wilfork, and Devin Hester. The NCAA later confirmed much of what he had claimed. The program tried to distance itself quickly, but the damage was done. Head coach Randy Shannon, who reportedly warned players to stay away from Shapiro, had already been fired. Al Golden, who took over in 2011, inherited a mess. Miami self-imposed bowl bans in 2011 and 2012 to soften NCAA penalties. The NCAA sanctioned the program with scholarship reductions and a 3-year probation, but many argued the punishment didn't match the scale of violations. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Reggie Bush/USC, 2005. Reggie Bush electrified college football during his time at USC. He won the Heisman Trophy, helped lead the Trojans to national dominance, and looked unstoppable every time he touched the ball. But behind the highlight reels was a scandal that would ultimately erase much of what he accomplished on paper. While Bush was still in school, he and his family accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts from marketing agents, hoping to sign him once he turned pro. The benefits included rent-free housing for his parents, a car, travel expenses, and other luxury items, all in violation of NCAA rules at the time. The scandal came to light after a failed business relationship between Bush's family and the agents turned bitter. Lawsuits were filed, investigations were launched, and the evidence piled up. The NCAA findings were damning. Bush had received impermissible benefits, and USC had failed to monitor the situation properly. The fallout was historic. USC was hit with severe sanctions, including a 2-year bowl ban, the loss of 30 scholarships, and the forfeiture of wins from the 2004 and 2005 seasons. Bush voluntarily forfeited his Heisman Trophy, becoming the first player in history to do so. It was a major blow to the image of one of college football's most storied programs. Ohio State Tattoogate, 2010. Ohio State was a national powerhouse under head coach Jim Tressel, with BCS bowl appearances and a roster full of NFL-caliber talent. But in 2010, a scandal surfaced that started small and quickly spiraled into something that rocked the program. Several Ohio State players, including star quarterback Terrell Pryor, were found to have traded memorabilia, including jerseys, championship rings, and awards, in exchange for tattoos and cash. While the trades themselves seemed harmless to many fans, they were a direct violation of NCAA rules, which prohibited athletes from profiting off their status in any way. The real damage came when it was discovered that Tressel had known about the violations months before they became public and failed to report them. In fact, he had received emails warning him about what his players were doing, but instead of alerting compliance officials, he stayed silent. When confronted, Tressel initially denied knowledge, then admitted he had lied. The fallout was swift. Tressel resigned under pressure, ending his successful tenure in disgrace. Pryor was suspended and later left school early to enter the NFL's supplemental draft. The Buckeyes vacated all their wins from the 2010 season, including a Sugar Bowl victory, and were hit with scholarship reductions and a bowl ban. University of Michigan sign-stealing scandal, 2023. Connor Stalions was an off-field analyst with Michigan football, a former Marine who volunteered his way into the program. In October 2023, the NCAA opened an investigation into alleged off-campus scouting of future opponents, a direct violation of Bylaw 11.6.1, which bans staff from attending opponents' games in the same season. Evidence quickly pointed to Stalions. Investigators allege he purchased tickets to more than 30 games at 11 Big Ten stadiums, handing them off to associates to film sideline hand signals used by upcoming opponents. In one reported instance, Stalions was disguised in Central Michigan staff gear on the sideline for their game against Michigan State on September 2023, raising red flags about intent and deception. Michigan responded by suspending Stalions with pay, and by November 3rd, 2023, he resigned from the staff. Linebackers coach Chris Partridge was later fired, reportedly for counseling players on how to respond to NCAA questions about the scandal. Head coach Jim Harbaugh, while never linked directly to the scheme, accepted a 3-game Big Ten suspension that year for unrelated recruiting violations. Despite this, Michigan went on to win the 2023 national championship, and NCAA President Charlie Baker later stated he believed the title was earned fair and square. Some experts, including Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, have urged leniency, suggesting Michigan has already been punished significantly, but penalties are still pending and could include postseason bans, scholarship reductions, or more suspensions. North Carolina academic fraud, 2010 to 2017. At the University of North Carolina, the scandal that unfolded was systemic, and it went on for nearly 2 decades. The root of the controversy was in the African and Afro-American Studies Department, where a number of so-called paper classes were offered. These weren't real courses in the traditional sense. No lectures, no attendance, just a single paper required for a passing grade. Hundreds of athletes, especially football and basketball players, were steered toward these classes to maintain eligibility and stay on the field. While the university initially framed it as an academic problem unrelated to athletics, further investigations showed how deeply athletic staff were involved. Academic counselors knowingly enrolled players in these classes to help them stay eligible. Emails showed coordination between academic and athletic departments to guide struggling athletes through the easiest possible coursework. What made the UNC scandal different was the sheer scale. Roughly 3,100 students took the bogus classes over 18 years, and around half were athletes. But when the NCAA concluded its investigation, it chose not to punish the school, arguing that because non-athletes were also enrolled, it couldn't prove the classes were created solely to benefit athletes. The backlash was fierce. Critics accused the NCAA of letting a marquee program off the hook, despite clear evidence of academic manipulation designed to protect the football and basketball teams. It reignited debates about academic integrity and whether major programs were putting sports above education. University of North Carolina kept its banners. No wins were vacated. But the damage to its reputation, especially in academic circles, lingered long after the investigations ended. Jameis Winston allegations. Florida State, 2013. Florida State quarterback Jameis Winston was the face of college football in 2013, a Heisman winner and the leader of an undefeated national championship team. But behind the scenes, a disturbing allegation hung over his meteoric rise. He had been accused of sexual assault nearly a year earlier, and the case had quietly stalled. The incident in question occurred in December 2012, when a fellow FSU student reported to police that she had been assaulted by an unknown man. It wasn't until several months later, after Winston had emerged as a football star, that his name became publicly linked to the case. By then, much of the initial evidence had already gone cold. Witnesses hadn't been thoroughly questioned. The crime scene wasn't processed properly, and the Tallahassee police had essentially shelved the investigation without informing the accuser that the suspect was Winston. When the story finally broke in November 2013, it set off a national firestorm. Critics accused the police and the university of dragging their feet to protect their quarterback. There were concerns about conflicts of interest, especially given how deeply ingrained football was in Tallahassee culture. The investigation was eventually reopened under public pressure, but no charges were filed, with prosecutors citing insufficient evidence. Even though Winston never faced criminal charges, the fallout didn't end there. Florida State later settled a Title IX lawsuit with the accuser for $950,000. The university was also criticized for failing to conduct its own timely disciplinary hearing, as required under federal law. Throughout the ordeal, Winston remained on the field, guiding FSU to a national title and continuing his career unimpeded. But the scandal raised uncomfortable questions about how allegations involving star athletes are handled, especially when millions of dollars in school reputations are on the line. Baylor sexual assault scandal, 2016. Baylor was one of the last places anyone expected a scandal of this scale. A small Christian university with a rising football program, under coach Art Briles, Baylor had become a Big 12 powerhouse. But behind the success was a culture of silence, power, and devastating neglect. Between 2012 and 2016, a wave of sexual assault allegations emerged involving Baylor football players. Women came forward accusing multiple athletes of rape and assault, often reporting incidents to university officials. But rather than investigate thoroughly or hold anyone accountable, those in power, from coaches to administrators, appeared more focused on protecting the program's reputation. Internal reports would later reveal that Baylor failed to act on numerous allegations. In some cases, the university discouraged victims from filing complaints. In others, law enforcement cooperation was suspiciously absent. According to investigations, Art Briles and his staff knew about several incidents and either ignored them or worked behind the scenes to keep things quiet. One particularly chilling report alleged that Baylor football players had committed as many as 52 acts of assault over 4 years. The exact number was debated, but the culture of permissiveness was undeniable. The fallout was massive. Art Briles was fired. Baylor's president, Ken Starr, yes, the same Ken Starr from the Clinton impeachment investigation, resigned. Athletic director Ian McCaw stepped down, and the NCAA launched its own investigation. But what made the Baylor scandal stand out was how deeply the university failed its students. Football players were allowed to keep playing despite credible allegations. Victims were left unsupported, and the system, from the top down, seemed more concerned with wins and headlines than with justice. To this day, Baylor's handling of the scandal remains one of the most damning examples of institutional failure in college football history. Cam Newton recruitment scandal. 2010. Cam Newton's road to superstardom wasn't a straight shot. Before becoming a Heisman Trophy winner and national champion at Auburn, he was at the center of a swirling recruitment controversy that nearly derailed his rise. The saga began when Newton transferred from a junior college to Auburn in 2010. Almost immediately, questions surfaced about how and why he ended up there, especially given that Mississippi State had been heavily pursuing him too. Then came the bombshell, a report alleging that Newton's father, Cecil Newton, had solicited a 6-figure payment from Mississippi State boosters in exchange for his son's commitment. And the NCAA launched its own investigation. Mississippi State coaches confirmed they were approached with a pay-for-play proposition. The evidence suggested that Cecil Newton had indeed asked for money. But crucially, there was no proof Cam himself knew anything about it. This technicality became the hinge on which the entire case rested. Incredibly, just days before the SEC championship game, the NCAA ruled Newton eligible. Their reasoning? While a violation occurred, Cam's lack of direct knowledge meant Auburn could keep playing him. It was a decision that baffled some and infuriated others, especially considering the NCAA's usually strict stance on impermissible benefits. Newton went on to win the Heisman Trophy and lead Auburn to a national championship. But the cloud never fully cleared. Critics argued that Auburn had escaped accountability on a loophole. Meanwhile, the case highlighted the murky world of college football recruiting, where families, boosters, and bagmen often operate in the shadows, while athletes claim plausible deniability. Despite the controversy, Newton's legacy remained intact on the field. Maurice Clarett, Ohio State, 2003. Maurice Clarett had one of the fastest rises and most dramatic falls in college football history. As a true freshman in 2002, he led Ohio State to a national championship, scoring the game-winning touchdown in double overtime against Miami. He was instantly a star, but within months, the fairy tale started unraveling. In 2003, Clarett was suspended for the entire season after an NCAA investigation revealed he had received thousands of dollars in improper benefits, things like cash advances from boosters and free cars. He was also accused of lying to investigators about a stolen car incident involving a friend. The suspension effectively ended his college career. Rather than returning to school, Clarett attempted to challenge the NFL's eligibility rules, arguing he should be allowed to enter the draft after just 1 year out of high school. The case went to federal court, where he initially won, only for the decision to be overturned on appeal. He was ultimately barred from entering the 2004 draft. By the time Clarett finally became eligible in 2005, his stock had plummeted. He was a third-round pick by the Denver Broncos, but showed up to camp out of shape, and was cut before playing a single down. Things got worse from there. In 2006, he was arrested after robbing 2 people at gunpoint outside a nightclub in Columbus. When police pulled him over, they found 4 loaded guns and a bottle of vodka in his SUV, all while he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Clarett was sentenced to more than 7 years in prison, serving over 3. He eventually turned his life around, earning a degree, speaking publicly about mental health, and founding a behavioral health agency in Ohio. Marcus Vick, Virginia Tech, 2005. Marcus Vick entered college football with immense hype. As the younger brother of Michael Vick, one of the most electric players in the sport's history, expectations were sky high. He had the same dual threat ability, the same cannon arm, and the same ability to make defenders look silly. But his time at Virginia Tech was defined less by highlight plays and more by headlines, and not the good kind. Vick's off-field problems started early. In 2004, he was suspended for the entire season after being charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He was accused of providing alcohol to underage girls and having sexual contact with one of them. He was also cited for reckless driving and marijuana possession that year. Even with the suspension, Virginia Tech gave him another chance. The university claimed he was undergoing personal growth and deserved an opportunity to redeem himself. But 2005 was chaos. On the field, he showed flashes of brilliance and helped the Hokies go 11-2. Off the field, the controversies piled up. During the Gator Bowl, Vic deliberately stomped on the leg of Louisville defensive end Elvis Dumervil, a move that caused outrage and circulated nationwide. Just days later, he was pulled over for speeding, going 38 miles over the limit, and driving on a suspended license. That was the final straw. Virginia Tech dismissed Vic from the program entirely. The university president said, "There is no more opportunity for Marcus Vick at Virginia Tech." He declared for the NFL draft shortly after, but went undrafted. The Miami Dolphins picked him up as a free agent and converted him into a wide receiver, but he never made an impact. His NFL career ended after just one season. Over the years, Vick has had more run-ins with the law, including charges of brandishing a firearm, DUI, and resisting arrest. He remains one of the most frustrating what-if stories in college football. Lawrence Phillips, Nebraska, 1995. Lawrence Phillips was the ultimate contradiction, a generational talent who constantly battled personal demons. At Nebraska, he was a powerhouse running back with NFL-caliber strength and agility, helping the Cornhuskers win 2 national championships under head coach Tom Osborne. But behind the scenes, Phillips's behavior raised red flags long before the public ever found out. In 1995, Nebraska had just dominated Michigan State when news broke that Phillips had broken into the apartment of his ex-girlfriend, a Nebraska basketball player, and physically assaulted her. He dragged her down 3 flights of stairs by her hair. The incident was brutal and public. The university suspended him immediately, but the backlash was intense. Yet, just 6 weeks later, Osborne reinstated Phillips to the team, claiming he believed football was the best structure to keep him from spiraling further. Many criticized the decision as a win-at-all-costs move. Osborne defended it as giving a young man a second chance, but it became one of the most controversial moments of his Hall of Fame career. Phillips returned to the field and played in the 1996 Fiesta Bowl National Championship game. He scored a touchdown and rushed for 165 yards, helping Nebraska cap off a 12-0 season. He then declared for the NFL draft, where the St. Louis Rams still took him 6th overall, despite widespread concern about his behavior. It didn't take long for those concerns to turn into headlines. He clashed with coaches, showed up late to meetings, and was arrested multiple times, including for domestic violence against a girlfriend. He bounced around to the 49ers, Dolphins, and even the CFL, but his off-field issues always followed. Eventually, Phillips was sentenced to over 30 years in prison for domestic abuse, assault with a deadly weapon, and other charges. While incarcerated, he was charged with the murder of his cellmate, then later found dead in his cell, an apparent suicide. Bobby Petrino motorcycle crash scandal, Arkansas, 2012. In April 2012, Bobby Petrino was on top of the world. He had just led the Arkansas Razorbacks to an 11-2 season and a top 5 national ranking. The program was thriving, boosters were happy, and Petrino was seen as one of the most brilliant offensive minds in college football. Then came the motorcycle crash. At first, the story seemed like a strange but harmless accident. Petrino crashed his Harley-Davidson on a quiet Arkansas highway, sustaining injuries to his neck and face. He held a press conference shortly after, wearing a neck brace and insisting he was alone at the time of the crash. The university released a statement backing him, and the situation appeared to be contained. But everything unraveled fast. A police report later revealed that Petrino was not alone. He had been riding with Jessica Dorrell, a 25-year-old former Razorback volleyball player, whom Petrino had recently hired for a position within the football department. That hiring skipped standard protocol and raised major red flags. As it turned out, Petrino and Dorrell were having an inappropriate relationship. Not only had he hired her out of a pool of over 150 applicants, but he had also given her a $20,000 cash gift, an amount that went completely unreported. When this information surfaced, it became impossible for the university to justify his continued employment. The university launched an investigation and concluded that Petrino had knowingly misled athletic department officials, failed to disclose the relationship, and violated multiple university policies. On April 10, 2012, Arkansas officially fired him with cause, meaning he received no buyout from the multi-million-dollar contract he had signed just a year prior. The scandal became a viral spectacle. The image of Petrino in a neck brace with road rash on his face turned into a meme overnight. But behind the public mockery was a serious reminder of how power, secrecy, and personal decisions could bring down even the most successful programs in a matter of days. Petrino's fall from grace was swift. Once regarded as a genius play caller destined for an elite program, he now had to rebuild his career from the bottom. He eventually returned to coaching, but the motorcycle crash and everything it revealed became a permanent stain on his legacy.
52 career sacks. Terrell Suggs. Quarterbacks in college football are protected more than ever today. Offensive schemes spread defenses out, quick passing attacks neutralize pass rushers, and mobile quarterbacks escape pressure constantly. That's what makes Terrell Suggs recording 52 career sacks at Arizona State Sun Devils feel so intimidating historically. Suggs didn't just pressure quarterbacks. He hunted them relentlessly for 3 straight seasons. Suggs exploded nationally during the early 2000s because of his combination of speed, power, and timing off the edge. Offensive linemen struggled to handle him because he could win in multiple ways. Sometimes he blew past tackles with pure explosiveness. Other times he overwhelmed blockers physically before collapsing the pocket entirely. Quarterbacks rarely looked comfortable once Suggs established momentum in a game. The most terrifying season came in 2002 when Suggs recorded 24 sacks in a single year, another NCAA record. He constantly lived inside opposing backfields, destroying offensive drives before they could even develop. At one point, it felt like every nationally televised Arizona State game featured another strip sack, another quarterback hit, or another offensive line collapsing under pressure. What made the career total so impressive was consistency. Many elite pass rushers produce one monster season before cooling off statistically, but Suggs remained disruptive throughout his career. He finished with 163 total tackles, forced fumbles, and constant quarterback pressure while becoming the centerpiece of Arizona State's defense. The era itself also mattered. College football offenses in the early 2000s still relied heavily on deeper dropbacks and slower developing passing concepts compared to modern spread systems. That created more sack opportunities, but even within that environment, Suggs' numbers stood far above almost everybody else. Offensive coordinators built protection schemes specifically around slowing him down, and he still kept breaking through. The physicality behind the record deserves attention too. Pass rushing at that level requires absorbing constant punishment from offensive linemen, tight ends, and double teams every week. Suggs maintained his explosiveness despite becoming the primary focus of opposing protection plans throughout his career. In today's game, breaking the record feels extremely difficult because offenses release the football much faster now. Quick screens, RPO concepts, mobile quarterbacks, and shotgun formations reduce sack opportunities dramatically. Defensive stars also rotate more often to preserve health, limiting snap counts compared to earlier eras. For years at Arizona State, he completely disrupted offensive game plans and forced opponents to play in fear of where he lined up every snap. 24 sacks in a single season. Terrell Suggs. Getting to a quarterback consistently is one of the hardest jobs in football. Offensive schemes are specifically designed to prevent it, with double teams, quick passing concepts, and protection adjustments, all built to slow elite pass rushers down. That's what makes Terrell Suggs recording 24 sacks in a single season at the Arizona State Sun Devils feel almost untouchable. Suggs was a nightmare for offenses because he combined explosiveness off the edge with relentless pursuit after the snap. Tackles often struggled to even establish proper positioning before he was already attacking the backfield. What separated his season from normal elite pass rushing years was consistency. Most defenders have dominant stretches, or a handful of multi-sack games, but Suggs disrupted offenses almost every week, regardless of opponent or game situation. Another key factor was versatility. Suggs could beat blockers with speed around the edge, power through contact, or use hand technique to slip past protection schemes. Offenses couldn't simply prepare for one pass rushing style. His production also came during an era where offenses were becoming more aggressive through the air, creating more sack opportunities, but also placing greater emphasis on pass protection. Even with offenses increasingly aware of edge pressure, Suggs still overwhelmed blockers repeatedly. Single-season sack records are especially difficult to break because modern offenses emphasize quick passing to neutralize pass rushers. Quarterbacks release the ball faster now than in previous eras, reducing the time defenders have to finish plays. Injuries and rotation systems also make extreme sack totals harder to sustain. Most elite defenders today rotate snaps to preserve stamina, while Suggs handled a massive workload throughout his historic season. 6 punt return touchdowns. Dante Hall. Special teams records are some of the hardest achievements in football to sustain because they rely on chaos, timing, and explosive athleticism all happening at once. That's why Dante Hall scoring 6 punt return touchdowns at the Texas A&M Aggies remains one of the most dangerous return achievements ever recorded. Punt returns are uniquely difficult compared to offensive plays because the returner begins surrounded by defenders, sprinting downfield at full speed. One mistake in vision or timing usually ends the play immediately. Hall's greatest strength was acceleration in tight spaces. He could make the first defender miss almost instantly, which completely changed the structure of the coverage unit and opened return lanes that didn't originally exist. Another major factor was field awareness. Elite returners process angles rapidly while navigating blockers, incoming tacklers, and sideline space simultaneously. Hall consistently turned broken-looking returns into explosive scoring opportunities. Punt return touchdowns are also heavily dependent on opportunity. Many teams simply avoid kicking toward dangerous returners entirely, which limits chances for accumulation. The fact Hall still reached 6 touchdowns despite that respect shows how overwhelming he was when opponents tested him. Modern punting strategies make records like this even harder to challenge. Specialists now focus heavily on directional punting, hang time, and boundary placement, specifically designed to eliminate return lanes. Rule changes and safer special teams philosophies have also reduced the number of explosive returns across football overall, making extreme return touchdown totals increasingly rare. 8 career kick return touchdowns. Tyrone Hughes. Kickoff returns might be the most explosive plays in football because they combine full-speed collisions with massive amounts of open space. At the Nebraska Cornhuskers, Tyrone Hughes turned those moments into a career-long scoring weapon, finishing with 8 kick return touchdowns. What makes kickoff return records so difficult is opportunity. Returners depend entirely on opponents kicking toward them, and once a player proves dangerous, teams often adjust by kicking away, using squib kicks, or prioritizing touchbacks. Hughes thrived because of his combination of vision and acceleration. Elite kick returners must identify developing lanes within seconds while avoiding defenders charging downhill at full speed. And Hughes consistently processed those angles faster than coverage units could react. Another key factor was balance through contact. Kickoff returns rarely involve clean open field runs from start to finish. Returners often survive arm tackles or initial collisions before breaking into space, and Hughes repeatedly turned partially stopped plays into touchdowns. Special teams blocking also played a role. Nebraska's return units consistently created lanes that allowed Hughes to reach the second level, where his speed became extremely difficult to contain. Modern football has dramatically reduced kickoff return opportunities through rule changes designed around player safety. Increased touchbacks and altered kickoff formations have made return touchdowns far less common than they were in earlier eras. Because of those changes, career kick return touchdown records are becoming harder, not easier, to challenge, despite advances in athlete speed and training. Hughes' return touchdown total remains historically significant because it reflects a player who consistently changed games through one of football's most unpredictable and dangerous phases. 57 straight games with a sack. Clemson Tigers. Recording a sack in one game is routine for elite defenses. Doing it every single game for years is something completely different. The Clemson Tigers built one of the most relentless defensive streaks in college football history by recording at least one sack in 57 consecutive games. What made the streak so impressive was consistency across different rosters and seasons. Clemson's defensive line constantly reloaded with NFL-level talent, allowing the pass rush to remain dominant even as star players left for the professional level. The streak reflected more than just individual edge rushers. Clemson's defensive structure consistently generated pressure through stunts, blitz timing, interior disruption, and overwhelming depth across the defensive front. Another major factor was defensive line development under Dabo Swinney's program structure. Clemson became known for producing explosive pass rushers capable of winning one-on-one matchups against elite offensive lines. Modern offenses are specifically designed to prevent sack totals from piling up. Quick passing concepts, spread formations, and mobile quarterbacks reduce the time defenders have to reach the pocket, making long sack streaks increasingly difficult to sustain. The streak also survived games against elite opponents, including playoff-caliber offenses with advanced protection schemes and experienced quarterbacks capable of identifying pressure before the snap. Maintaining a sack streak across dozens of games requires durability, depth, recruiting consistency, and defensive aggression all functioning together without major drop-offs. 74-72. 7. Overtime game. Texas A&M Aggies versus LSU Tigers. Some college football games slowly build tension. Others completely descend into chaos. The 74-72 showdown between the Texas A&M Aggies and the LSU Tigers became one of the most exhausting and unbelievable games the sport has ever seen, stretching into 7 overtimes and lasting nearly 5 hours. The game originally looked like a major statement opportunity for LSU, who entered the matchup ranked highly and carrying playoff momentum. But Texas A&M kept responding every time LSU appeared ready to pull away, forcing the game into an overtime battle that gradually became more about survival than strategy. What made the game historic was more than just the final score. It was the emotional swings. Each overtime completely changed momentum again. One team would appear seconds away from victory, only for the other side to answer immediately under extreme pressure. Quarterback play became central to the chaos. Both offenses repeatedly converted critical third downs, red zone plays, and two-point attempts while operating under mounting physical exhaustion and crowd pressure. Another major factor was pace. Modern spread offenses allowed both teams to score rapidly, even late into the game, which kept neither defense fully in control for long stretches. Once overtime started, every possession carried season-defining weight. Defensively, fatigue became impossible to hide. By the later overtimes, players were physically drained, coverage breakdowns increased, tackling suffered, and offenses began finding explosive opportunities that normally wouldn't exist earlier in games. The matchup ultimately became so extreme that it influenced future overtime discussions across college football. Games lasting this long raised concerns about player safety, roster fatigue, and the sustainability of endless possession-based overtime formats. 9 overtimes in one game. Illinois Fighting Illini versus Penn State Nittany Lions. By the time the Illinois Fighting Illini and the Penn State Nittany Lions reached 9 overtimes, the game no longer resembled normal football. It had transformed into a psychological endurance contest, where execution, composure, and pure survival mattered more than rhythm or momentum. Unlike earlier eras of overtime football, the modern overtime format forced teams into repeated two-point conversion attempts after the second overtime. That dramatically changed the nature of the game, turning every possession into a high-pressure, single-play scenario. What made the matchup so surreal was how difficult scoring suddenly became. Both teams repeatedly failed conversion attempts as defensive pressure intensified and offensive creativity started running out after hours of football. Fatigue became one of the defining elements of the game. Offensive linemen struggled to maintain protection, defensive fronts reacted slower, and play callers increasingly relied on simplified concepts because players were physically and mentally exhausted. Another major factor was psychological pressure. Every snap carried enormous weight because one failed conversion could instantly end the game. As overtime continued, tension increased with every possession. The game also highlighted how modern overtime rules can produce extreme outcomes. Instead of extended drives, the format shifted into repeated isolated scoring attempts, creating a completely different type of drama than traditional overtime football. For viewers, the game became strangely hypnotic. What started as a normal Big Ten matchup slowly evolved into a test of patience, endurance, and emotional resilience for everyone involved. The 9-overtime game remains unforgettable, given that it pushed the modern overtime system further than anyone expected, and created one of the strangest endurance battles in college football history. 3 straight national titles in the Pole era: Minnesota Golden Gophers and Army Black Knights. Winning one national championship is extraordinarily difficult. Winning back-to-back titles requires surviving enormous pressure, roster turnover, and rising expectations. Winning 3 straight national championships is something even the greatest dynasties in college football history have struggled to accomplish. Programs like the Minnesota Golden Gophers, 1934-36, and Army Black Knights, 1944-46, achieved sustained dominance during earlier eras of the sport, when roster depth, regional recruiting advantages, and limited national parity allowed powerhouse programs to maintain control for extended periods. What makes modern three-peats so difficult is how dramatically the sport has changed. Scholarship limits, national recruiting, transfer movement, NIL dynamics, and playoff pressure constantly pull elite rosters apart after championship seasons. The Alabama Crimson Tide under Nick Saban came closer than most modern programs because of relentless recruiting and organizational consistency. Alabama consistently replaced NFL departures with new elite talent, without major drop-offs in performance. Another major challenge is psychological fatigue. Championship programs spend multiple seasons playing every opponent's biggest game while managing non-stop media attention and national expectations. In earlier eras, dynasties often relied on overwhelming physical advantages and smaller talent pools. Modern football spreads elite athletes across far more programs, making sustained dominance much harder to maintain year after year. Expanded playoffs may make future dynasties even harder, because elite teams now face more high-pressure elimination games against top competition, rather than relying solely on poll voting and bowl outcomes. 3 consecutive national titles remain one of the rarest achievements in college football history. For it to happen, it requires elite talent, organizational stability, health, motivation, and longevity, all surviving across multiple championship seasons. 95,000 plus average attendance before modern stadium expansion. Michigan Wolverines. Long before college football became a nationwide television giant with billion-dollar media deals, the Michigan Wolverines were already drawing crowds that looked more like professional championship events than ordinary college games. Averaging more than 95,000 fans before the modern stadium expansion era reflected something far bigger than just winning football games. It showed how deeply embedded Michigan football had become in American sports culture. Most college programs historically relied on regional fan bases and occasional marquee games to fill stadiums. Michigan operated differently. Week after week, enormous crowds packed into Michigan Stadium, regardless of opponent, weather, or national ranking. What made the attendance numbers especially remarkable was timing. This happened before modern luxury expansions, advanced digital marketing, and the nonstop media exposure that fuels today's attendance culture. Fans were showing up in massive numbers purely because attending Michigan football had already become a generational tradition. Another major factor was the scale of the program itself. Michigan football developed a reputation that extended far beyond the state, turning home games into national events years before college football fully transformed into a television-driven entertainment machine. The stadium atmosphere also contributed heavily to the program's identity. Huge crowds created an overwhelming environment where noise, tradition, and visual scale became part of the experience itself, rather than just background to the game. Modern attendance numbers are shaped heavily by television convenience, ticket pricing, and entertainment competition, making consistent in-person attendance increasingly difficult even for elite programs. 109,000 plus largest stadium crowds, Michigan Stadium. When people talk about the largest environments in American sports, Michigan Stadium immediately enters the conversation. Known as the Big House, the stadium has hosted crowds exceeding 109,000 people, creating one of the largest live sporting atmospheres anywhere in the world. What makes those numbers difficult to fully understand is scale. Most professional stadiums don't come close to that capacity, yet Michigan regularly fills the venue for ordinary, regular season college football games. The visual impact alone is overwhelming. Rows of fans stretch almost endlessly around the stadium bowl, and when the crowd fully rises during major moments, the atmosphere feels more like a massive international event than a typical football game. Another major factor is consistency. Many large stadiums only approach maximum attendance for championship games or rare showcase events. Michigan routinely generates enormous crowds throughout entire seasons. The size of the crowd also changes the experience for opposing teams. Communication becomes difficult, momentum swings feel amplified, and the emotional pressure of playing in front of over 100,000 people creates a completely different environment compared to smaller venues. Historically, Michigan Stadium also symbolized college football's growth into a national spectacle. Massive attendance numbers demonstrated the sport's ability to attract audiences comparable to major professional leagues long before modern media expansion accelerated revenue and popularity. Even as modern entertainment options continue expanding, few programs consistently maintain attendance numbers at this scale, which keeps Michigan Stadium in a category almost entirely by itself. 489 wins by one coach, John Gagliardi. Winning football games for a few years is difficult. Winning consistently across decades is almost impossible. John Gagliardi took that challenge to an entirely different level, finishing with 489 career victories, one of the most extraordinary coaching totals in football history. Gagliardi spent the vast majority of his legendary career at St. John's Johnnies, where he built a program defined by discipline, consistency, and long-term cultural stability rather than flashy national attention. What made his coaching career so remarkable was longevity. Coaching successfully over multiple decades requires adapting constantly as the sport evolves through rule changes, recruiting shifts, tactical developments, and entirely new generations of players. Another major factor was sustained organizational culture. Gagliardi created an environment where success became repeatable because players entered a program with clear expectations, continuity, and established standards year after year. His coaching philosophy also stood out because it emphasized simplicity and player trust rather than constant control. That approach helped maintain strong locker room relationships over unusually long periods of time. Records involving coaching victories are especially difficult to break because modern football creates enormous burnout pressure. Coaches face non-stop recruiting demands, media scrutiny, transfer portal management, and performance expectations that make multi-decade stability increasingly rare. Even elite coaches today rarely remain at one school long enough to accumulate truly historic victory totals, especially with the pressure and movement surrounding modern college football. 46-year coaching career at one school, Joe Paterno. In modern college football, Coaches rarely stay anywhere long enough to fully define an era. Jobs change, pressure builds quickly, and programs constantly chase immediate results. That's what makes Joe Paterno spending 4 decades leading the Penn State Nittany Lions feel almost impossible in today's version of the sport. Paterno officially took over Penn State in 1966 and remained the face of the program for generations. Entire families grew up with him on the sidelines, which transformed Penn State football from simply a successful program into a long-standing institutional identity tied directly to one coach. What made the longevity so remarkable was sustained competitiveness. Many coaches last a long time because of past achievements, but Paterno consistently kept Penn State nationally relevant across completely different eras of college football. The sport itself changed dramatically during his career. Offensive systems evolved, television exposure exploded, recruiting became nationalized, scholarship structures shifted, and media pressure intensified. Paterno survived every transition while maintaining program stability. Another major factor was cultural continuity. Penn State developed a recognizable structure and philosophy that outlived individual players or seasons because the program remained under one long-term vision for decades. Modern coaching environments make records like this extremely difficult to replicate. Coaches now deal with transfer portal management, NIL recruiting battles, non-stop media cycles, and massive financial expectations that create far less long-term stability. Even elite modern coaches rarely remain at one school for multiple decades, let alone 40 years while consistently competing at a high national level. Paterno's tenure remains one of the most extraordinary longevity records in sports. It reflects not only coaching success, but an era where one individual could shape the identity of an entire college football program across generations. 64-game unbeaten streak. Washington Huskies. Going undefeated for a single season is difficult enough in college football. Doing it across multiple years against changing opponents, rising expectations, and mounting national pressure is almost unheard of. That's why the Washington Huskies producing a 64-game unbeaten streak, 1908 to 1916, remains one of the most dominant stretches in the sport's history. An unbeaten streak is different from a winning streak because it includes both victories and ties, which were more common in earlier eras before overtime rules permanently eliminated drawn games. Even so, avoiding defeat for that long required extraordinary consistency. What made the streak so impressive was sustained discipline. Every week, Washington faced opponents treating the matchup like a championship opportunity, knowing they had a chance to end one of the nation's biggest runs. Another major factor was roster transition. College football dynasties constantly lose graduating players, meaning long unbeaten streaks require new starters to immediately sustain elite standards without significant drop-offs. Defensively, teams during historic streaks often develop identities built around physicality and mistake prevention. Washington consistently controlled games by limiting errors and forcing opponents into uncomfortable situations over 4 quarters. Psychological pressure also grows heavier the longer streaks continue. Once national attention locks onto an unbeaten run, every close game feels magnified because one mistake can erase years of momentum instantly. Modern college football parity makes streaks like this increasingly difficult. Scholarship limits, expanded national recruiting, and playoff pressure spread talent more evenly across programs than in earlier eras. 43 straight wins. Notre Dame Fighting Irish over the Navy Midshipmen. Rivalries are supposed to swing back and forth over time. Coaching changes, recruiting cycles, and emotional momentum usually prevent one side from completely controlling the series forever. That's what made the Notre Dame Fighting Irish defeating the Navy Midshipmen 43 consecutive times such a staggering achievement. The streak began after Navy defeated Notre Dame in 1963 and continued for decades afterward, spanning multiple generations of players, coaching staffs, and completely different eras of college football. What made the streak especially unusual was the emotional relationship between the programs. Unlike many rivalries built around hatred, Notre Dame and Navy maintained a deep historical connection dating back to World War II, when Navy training programs helped support Notre Dame financially during difficult periods. On the field, however, the talent gap gradually became overwhelming. Notre Dame consistently recruited at a national championship level, while Navy operated under the unique physical and academic requirements attached to service academy football. Another major factor was stylistic contrast. Navy's triple option offense could frustrate opponents, but over decades, Notre Dame usually possessed enough size, depth, and athleticism to eventually control games physically. Long streaks become psychologically heavier over time. Each new Navy team entered the rivalry carrying decades of history, while Notre Dame carried the pressure of protecting one of the sport's most famous dominance runs. Modern college football parity makes streaks of this length extremely difficult to imagine today. Even powerhouse programs usually experience occasional upset losses over long rivalry histories. 0 pass attempts in a game and winning. Nebraska Cornhuskers. In modern football, throwing the ball is considered essential. Offenses are built around quarterbacks, spacing, and explosive passing concepts designed to attack every inch of the field. That's why the idea of winning a game with 0 pass attempts feels almost impossible today. But for programs like the Nebraska Cornhuskers during their power football eras, dominating without throwing was impossible. Nebraska's offensive philosophy, under coaches like Tom Osborne, revolved around physical superiority. The goal was to overwhelm defenses through option football, power running, and relentless line play until opponents physically collapsed. What made these games so fascinating was efficiency. Nebraska often controlled time of possession so completely that opponents had very limited opportunities to recover momentum or force schematic adjustments. The option system also created mathematical advantages in the running game. Because the quarterback remained an active rushing threat, defenses constantly had to account for extra blockers and misdirection without knowing where the ball would end up. Another major factor was offensive line dominance. Nebraska's lines routinely overpowered opponents physically, creating rushing lanes even when defenses fully expected the run on nearly every snap. Modern football evolution makes this style far more difficult now. Defensive speed, offensive expectations, and recruiting philosophy all prioritize passing attacks, making true zero-attempt victories increasingly rare. Games won without throwing the football still feel almost mythical today. They represent an entirely different era of college football, where physical control alone could dominate games from start to finish. 2,628 single-season rushing yards. Barry Sanders. In 1988, Barry Sanders delivered a college football season that still feels almost impossible to comprehend statistically. Playing for the Oklahoma State Cowboys, Sanders rushed for 2,628 yards in a single season, averaging over 238 rushing yards per game, while scoring touchdowns at a rate that made defenses look helpless. Even decades later, the season remains one of the most untouchable individual performances in football history. What makes the record so absurd is how quickly Sanders piled up the numbers. He reached 2,628 yards in just 11 regular season games before bowl statistics officially counted toward NCAA records. If his Holiday Bowl performance had been included, Sanders would have finished with 2,850 rushing yards and 42 total touchdowns. That means he averaged nearly 260 rushing yards per game across the entire season. Modern running backs rarely approach those numbers, even during their hottest stretches. Sanders replaced another future NFL star, Thurman Thomas, and somehow made Oklahoma State's offense even more explosive. Defenses knew Sanders would receive the football constantly, yet stopping him became almost impossible because of his vision, acceleration, and balance. He could disappear behind blockers, explode through tiny gaps, and turn routine plays into 70-yard touchdowns within seconds. The consistency throughout the season looked unreal. Sanders rushed for over 300 yards in 4 separate games and exceeded 200 rushing yards 8 times. Against Texas Tech Red Raiders, he ran for 332 yards. Against Kansas Jayhawks, he exploded for 320 more. Week after week, opponents entered games fully aware of what was coming and still couldn't stop it. What separated Sanders from other legendary running backs was how effortless many of the runs looked. He rarely appeared to be running at full speed until defenders suddenly lost angles completely. His cutting ability forced defenders into hesitation, and hesitation against Sanders usually ended badly. Entire defenses looked exhausted trying to chase him across 4 quarters. The workload behind the season also feels almost impossible in today's football environment. Sanders carried the ball 344 times during the season, and modern programs rarely allow elite running backs to absorb that many touches anymore. Coaches now rotate backs heavily to preserve health and protect NFL futures. Sanders handled an enormous workload without slowing down statistically. In today's spread-heavy era, a record like this feels incredibly difficult to break. Modern offenses distribute touches widely, quarterbacks steal rushing production, and star running backs often leave for the NFL early. Reaching 2,600 rushing yards would require a perfect combination of durability, offensive commitment, and explosive playmaking that almost never exists anymore. 37 rushing TDs in a season. Barry Sanders. If Barry Sanders' rushing yardage record already sounded untouchable, the touchdown total somehow looked even more ridiculous. During the 1988 season with the Oklahoma State Cowboys, Sanders scored 37 rushing touchdowns in just 11 regular season games. Including the bowl game, the total climbed to 39 rushing touchdowns and 42 overall scores. Defenses didn't merely struggle to stop him between the 20-yard lines. They completely failed to stop him near the end zone. The pace of scoring throughout the season was absurd. Sanders averaged over 3 touchdowns per game, meaning opponents often entered halftime already watching him destroy defensive game plans. Some teams simply couldn't survive his explosiveness mentally because every small mistake seemed to turn into another touchdown moments later. What made the touchdown numbers especially terrifying was the variety of ways Sanders scored. He could break massive runs from midfield, slip through crowded goal line situations, or suddenly reverse field and outrun entire defenses. Many elite backs rely heavily on short yardage touchdowns behind dominant offensive lines. Sanders scored from everywhere on the field, which made Oklahoma State's offense feel dangerous on almost every snap. Several performances during the season became legendary instantly. Sanders scored 6 rushing touchdowns against Texas Tech Red Raiders while rushing for 332 yards. He added 5 touchdowns against Iowa State Cyclones and repeatedly turned competitive games into blowouts through explosive scoring runs. Once Sanders found open space, most defenders had no chance of catching him. The season also highlighted how heavily Oklahoma State relied on Sanders offensively. Modern teams often distribute red zone touches among multiple backs and quarterbacks, but Sanders remained the clear centerpiece of nearly every scoring opportunity. Defenses stacked the line of scrimmage, desperately trying to stop him, and he still kept reaching the end zone anyway. What makes the record feel nearly impossible today is the combination of workload and efficiency required. Modern running backs rarely receive enough carries to approach 37 rushing touchdowns, especially with offenses now emphasizing passing near the goal line. Quarterbacks also absorb many rushing scores in spread systems, reducing opportunities for feature backs statistically. Even in an era filled with offensive explosions, Sanders' touchdown pace still feels outrageous. Scoring nearly 40 rushing touchdowns requires not only talent, but constant explosive production, durability, and an offense fully committed to feeding one player repeatedly. 408.0 passing efficiency rating. Mac Jones. National championship games are usually where offenses slow down. Defenses are elite, preparation time is longer, and quarterbacks face relentless pressure from opponents built specifically to eliminate mistakes. That's what made Mac Jones producing a 408.0 passer efficiency rating for the Alabama Crimson Tide against the Ohio State Buckeyes so extraordinary. Jones finished the game, completing 36 of 45 passes for 464 yards and 5 touchdowns, operating Alabama's offense at an almost flawless level on the biggest stage in college football. Every part of the passing attack looked controlled, efficient, and nearly impossible to disrupt. What made the performance historic was precision. Alabama's offense, under offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian, relied heavily on timing, spacing, and defensive manipulation, and Jones executed the system with almost no wasted movement or hesitation. His pre-snap processing was a major factor. Jones consistently identified coverage weaknesses before the snap and delivered the ball quickly enough to prevent Ohio State's pass rush from disrupting the offense. That efficiency kept Alabama ahead of the chains throughout the game. Another key element was chemistry with elite receivers, especially Devonta Smith, who repeatedly created separation against Ohio State's secondary. Jones consistently placed throws in stride, allowing explosive gains after the catch and sustaining Alabama's offensive rhythm. The stage itself adds historical weight to the record. Dominating statistically in regular season games is difficult enough, but national championship defenses are built from top-tier talent, with weeks to prepare specifically for one opponent. Modern college football has produced many explosive quarterback seasons, but maintaining near-perfect efficiency in the highest pressure game of the year is extremely rare. One mistake, turnover, or stalled drive usually drops efficiency ratings dramatically. Jones's 408.0 passer efficiency rating remains so remarkable because it reflects almost complete offensive control in the single most important game of the season against one of the best teams in the country. 263 career receptions. Trevor Inslee. At the Nevada Wolfpack, Trevor Inslee built one of the most volume-heavy receiving careers college football has ever seen, finishing with 263 career receptions. Even in today's pass-happy era, that number still feels almost impossible because of the consistency and durability required to sustain it over multiple seasons. Nevada's offense heavily emphasized the passing game, and Inslee quickly developed into the centerpiece of the attack. Quarterbacks repeatedly looked his direction on critical downs because of his route precision, reliable hands, and ability to consistently find space underneath defensive coverage. What made the reception total especially remarkable was defensive attention. Opponents knew Inslee was the primary target almost every week, yet he continued piling up catches through timing, sharp route breaks, and an ability to adjust against different coverage looks. Another major factor was offensive rhythm. Nevada frequently relied on short and intermediate passing concepts that naturally fed high reception totals to dependable receivers capable of extending drives possession after possession. Durability also played a massive role. High-target receivers absorb repeated contact over the course of a season, especially across the middle of the field. Maintaining elite availability long enough to build a record like this is extremely difficult. Modern college football actually makes this harder in some ways. Offenses now spread targets across multiple receivers, transfers interrupt long-term continuity, and elite wide receivers often leave early for the NFL before accumulating historic totals. 337 career tackles and 52 career sacks. Derek Thomas. Defensive records are often harder to appreciate because they don't always receive the same spotlight as offensive statistics. But piling up 337 career tackles and 52 career sacks requires extraordinary consistency, durability, and involvement in nearly every defensive series. At the college level, tackle accumulation reflects more than just physical ability. It shows how central a defender was within an entire defensive structure. Players who approach numbers this high are usually involved against the run, capable in pursuit, and disciplined enough to remain on the field in every situation. What makes career tackle records difficult to compare across eras is changing stat tracking and defensive philosophy. Some systems funnel tackles toward linebackers, while others spread responsibilities across multiple positions. That's part of why historical tackle records can vary depending on source and era. For elite defenders like Derek Thomas, production came from relentless activity around the football. Whether attacking the line of scrimmage, chasing plays sideline to sideline, or disrupting backfields. High tackle totals reflected non-stop involvement rather than isolated highlight plays. Another major factor is durability. Defensive players absorb constant physical punishment, and maintaining enough health to accumulate hundreds of tackles across several seasons is extremely difficult. Modern football rotations also reduce opportunities for massive tackle accumulation. Defensive coordinators substitute players more frequently, distribute snaps across deeper rotations, and rely on specialized packages that limit total tackle opportunities for individual defenders. Ohio State. Archie Griffin. Archie Griffin is the unquestioned GOAT of Ohio State football and one of the most unique legends in the sport's history. Playing from 1972 to 1975, Griffin was the engine of the Buckeyes during a dominant era and became the face of consistency, durability, and excellence. Griffin remains the only two-time Heisman Trophy winner ever, capturing the award in 1974 and 1975. He rushed for over 5,500 career yards, finished with 31 straight starts, and never missed a game. An almost unbelievable feat for a running back in a physical, run-heavy era. At a program overflowing with champions and Hall of Famers, Archie Griffin still stands alone. His longevity, consistency, and historic achievements created a benchmark no one has ever cleared. Ohio State has celebrated countless stars, but Griffin isn't part of the conversation. He is the reference point for greatness in college football. Texas. Earl Campbell. Texas football's identity in the late 1970s was built on brute force and intimidation, with Earl Campbell setting the standard. A rare power back with breakaway speed, he became the unquestioned centerpiece of the offense, dictating games through physical dominance and relentless finishes. From 1974 to 1977, Campbell not only produced yards and touchdowns, he established the tone and toughness that defined the Longhorns as a program. His legendary 1977 season sealed his place in history. Campbell won the Heisman Trophy, rushed for 1,744 yards, and led Texas to an 11-1 record and a Southwest Conference title. Defenses knew exactly what was coming and still couldn't stop him, as he punished tacklers and broke games open with explosive runs. Texas has produced stars at every position, but Earl Campbell was something heavier than talent. He was force. His running style mirrored the program itself, physical, unforgiving, and impossible to ignore. Every carry sent a message, and by the end of it, Texas wasn't surviving games, it was asserting control. Others have lifted trophies, but Campbell carried the Longhorn identity straight to the top. Georgia. Herschel Walker. Georgia football was transformed the moment Herschel Walker stepped on campus. Arriving as a freshman, he immediately altered the program's ceiling, blending overwhelming power, elite speed, and unmatched stamina into a force the sport wasn't prepared for. From 1980 to 1982, Walker did more than lead the Bulldogs. He redefined what dominance looked like at the college level and set a standard no one at Georgia has ever surpassed. His impact was instant and historic. In 1980, Walker rushed for 1,616 yards, led Georgia to a national championship, and finished third in Heisman voting as a freshman. He went on to win the Heisman Trophy in 1982, finishing his career with 5,259 rushing yards in just 3 seasons, a record that stood for decades. Herschel Walker stands alone at Georgia because his greatness skipped development and went straight to control. At an age when most players are finding their footing, he was carrying a national contender on his shoulders. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Oregon. Marcus Mariota. Oregon football's ascent into a national power aligned perfectly with the command and clarity of Marcus Mariota. He operated the Ducks' offense with rare composure, translating speed and innovation into ruthless efficiency while rarely putting the ball in harm's way. In addition to running the system between 2012 to 2014, Mariota elevated it, proving that precision and explosiveness could coexist at the highest level. His 2014 season was historic. Mariota won the Heisman Trophy, threw for 4,454 yards, accounted for 53 total touchdowns, and led Oregon to a college football playoff national championship appearance. He famously finished the regular season without throwing a single interception, a staggering feat in a high-tempo offense. Marcus Mariota is Oregon's GOAT because he turned philosophy into reality. The Ducks had flair before him, but with Mariota, the system reached full maturity, efficient, ruthless, and championship-ready. He didn't rely on chaos or volume. He made everything look clean and controlled. Penn State. LeVar Arrington. Penn State's defense reached another level when LeVar Arrington took control in the middle. His combination of speed, power, and instinct turned routine plays into chaos and made him one of the most intimidating defenders in the country. Between 1997 to 1999, Arrington did more than anchor the Nittany Lions. He reset the standard for what an elite linebacker could be. His peak came in 1999, when he finished 6th in Heisman Trophy voting, an almost unheard-of feat for a defensive player. That season included the iconic leap over the line versus Illinois, a play that became a symbol of his explosiveness. Arrington was a two-time All-American and winner of the Butkus Award as the nation's top linebacker. He wasn't a piece of the defense. He was the force everything moved around. Plays bent toward him, protections shifted because of him, and offenses planned entire weeks around avoiding him. His dominance changed how games were called and how opponents behaved. Alabama. Derek Thomas. Alabama's defensive identity reached a terrifying peak with Derek Thomas attacking off the edge. His first step, closing speed, and relentless aggression turned pass protection into panic and made every snap a threat to opposing quarterbacks. Derek Thomas began as Alabama's defensive anchor and finished as college football's pass-rushing standard. His 1988 season remains legendary. Thomas recorded 27 sacks, still one of the greatest single-season totals in NCAA history, and finished 10th in Heisman Trophy voting as a linebacker. He was a two-time All-American and the most disruptive defender in the country during his peak. No defender in Alabama ever overwhelmed games the way Derek Thomas did. He didn't represent elite defense. He established the standard. Clemson. Deshaun Watson. Clemson's breakthrough into the sport's top tier was powered by the composure and resolve of Deshaun Watson. He blended toughness with calm decision-making, delivering his best moments when the stakes were highest and the margin was thinnest. Watson guided the Tigers through big games from 2014 to 2016. He also carried them across the final barrier, turning Clemson from perennial contender into a national champion. Watson's defining moment came in 2016 when he led Clemson to a national championship, throwing for 4,593 yards and accounting for 50 total touchdowns. His performances in back-to-back national title games against Alabama, especially the game-winning drive in 2017, cemented his legacy as one of the sport's greatest big-game quarterbacks. Watson stands out as Clemson's GOAT because no one ever delivered championships, iconic moments, and sustained national relevance. In addition to winning titles, he changed Clemson's place in college football history. Miami. Ed Reed. Miami's defensive swagger and intelligence found their ultimate expression in Ed Reed. Playing with rare awareness and controlled aggression, he commanded the back end of the defense and forced offenses to rethink how they attacked the entire field. From 1997 to 2001, Reed was more than the heartbeat of the U. He embodied its speed, confidence, and intimidation, redefining what elite safety play looked like at the college level. His peak came during Miami's dominant 2001 national championship season, when he won the Jim Thorpe Award as the nation's best defensive back and finished 5th in Heisman Trophy voting, extremely rare for a defensive player. Reed was a two-time All-American whose range, ball skills, and leadership anchored one of the greatest defenses in college football history. Ed Reed isn't Miami's GOAT because of numbers alone. He controlled games. He erased mistakes before they happened, baited quarterbacks into throws they regretted instantly, and acted as an on-field coach directing chaos with precision. Michigan. Charles Woodson. Michigan's most iconic era revolved around the versatility and poise of Charles Woodson. A true two-way force, he erased top receivers on defense while also delivering momentum-shifting plays on offense and special teams when the moment demanded it. Between 1995 and 1997, Woodson moved from star to separator, consistently rising in Michigan's biggest moments. His defining season came in 1997, when he won the Heisman Trophy, becoming the first primarily defensive player to do so. That year, Woodson helped lead Michigan to a national championship, recorded clutch interceptions, returned punts for touchdowns, and even caught key passes on offense. He was a consensus All-American and the most feared defender in the country. Charles Woodson is Michigan's GOAT because he was the solution to every kind of problem. When games tightened, momentum stalled, or one play was needed to flip everything, he became the answer, no matter the position, no matter the moment. His versatility wasn't a bonus, it was the weapon. Notre Dame, Tim Brown. Notre Dame's offense found rare explosiveness and composure in Tim Brown, an all-purpose threat who consistently rose to the biggest stages. Whether lining up at receiver or flipping field position as a return specialist, he delivered momentum when the Irish needed it most. From 1985 to 1987, Brown stood out in an era that didn't spotlight offensive stars, redefining what versatility and clutch performance looked like in South Bend. His defining 1987 season earned him the Heisman Trophy, making him one of the few receivers ever to win the award. Brown's impact went far beyond receiving yards. His kickoff and punt returns flipped games instantly, and his big play ability forced opponents to change how they kicked, covered, and defended Notre Dame. When games tightened and margins vanished, he delivered field position swings, momentum shifts, and season-defining plays that don't always show up in box scores. No one in Notre Dame ever changed games in so many hidden, decisive ways as Tim Brown. LSU, Joe Burrow. LSU football reached an unprecedented peak behind the precision and confidence of Joe Burrow. He dismantled defenses with surgical accuracy and fearless command, turning the traditionally conservative offense into an unstoppable machine. In 2019, Burrow did more than dominate an all-time great schedule. He delivered the most complete quarterback season the sport has ever witnessed and permanently redefined LSU's ceiling. That season was historic across the board. Burrow threw for 5,671 yards, 60 touchdowns, won the Heisman Trophy, and led LSU to a 15-0 national championship. Along the way, the Tigers beat a gauntlet of top opponents, and Burrow delivered signature performances in every biggest moment, including a masterclass against Clemson in the title game. In addition to winning, Joe Burrow rewrote what LSU football could be, beating elite defenses week after week with poise and swagger. For a program built on defense and running the ball, Burrow's season brought a title and permanently expanded LSU's identity. Florida, Tim Tebow. Florida's modern peak was driven by the intensity and conviction of Tim Tebow. He powered the Gators with a rare blend of physical running, efficient passing, and unmatched competitive fire, setting the emotional tone every time he stepped on the field. Tebow anchored Urban Meyer's spread offense and, in the process, became the face of Florida's return to power, leading a program defined by belief, toughness, and championship expectations. His 2007 season made history. Tebow won the Heisman Trophy, accounting for 55 total touchdowns, and became the first player ever to throw for 20 touchdowns and rush for 20 more in a single season. He added 2 national championships, 2006, 2008, and multiple SEC titles, delivering elite production in the biggest games. Tebow embodied Florida's culture, setting a standard for toughness, accountability, and belief that carried the Gators through pressure moments. Oklahoma State, Barry Sanders. Oklahoma State's college football legacy is forever linked to the brilliance of Barry Sanders. His movement defied angles and expectations, turning routine carries into highlight reel inevitabilities and leaving defenses grasping at air. In 1988, Sanders did more than dominate. He produced a season so overwhelming and untouchable that it permanently separated him from every other running back in the history of the sport. That year, Sanders rushed for 2,628 yards and 37 touchdowns, still an NCAA single-season rushing record, while winning the Heisman Trophy. He averaged over 7.6 yards per carry, often sitting out fourth quarters because games were already decided. Defenses stacked the box, sold out entirely, and still watched him turn small creases into touchdowns. With Sanders, every yard was earned through vision, balance, and impossible change of direction, without the benefit of a wide-open system or complementary stars. No player has ever reached a higher individual peak, and no season has ever bent the sport around one person the way Barry Sanders did. Ole Miss, Archie Manning. Ole Miss football's most demanding era was defined by the toughness and resolve of Archie Manning. Playing with intelligence and grit, he carried the Rebels through an unforgiving SEC landscape, often without the depth or advantages enjoyed by their rivals. Manning carried the program during 1968 to 1970, serving as its backbone in an era that demanded constant resilience. His production stood out despite the circumstances. Manning threw for over 4,700 yards, rushed for more than 800 yards, and was a two-time All-SEC selection, finishing third in Heisman Trophy voting in 1969. His performances against elite SEC defenses made Ole Miss competitive in games where the talent gap was real and unavoidable. Archie Manning's gravity is what sets him apart. Opponents game-planned entirely around him, fans identified the program with him, and the Rebels' national relevance during that era existed largely because of his presence. South Carolina, Jadeveon Clowney. Jadeveon Clowney is the GOAT of South Carolina football, a once-in-a-generation defensive talent whose presence alone changed how offenses operated. From 2011 to 2013, Clowney brought rare size, speed, and violence off the edge, instantly becoming the most feared defender the program has ever produced. His peak came in 2012, when he recorded 13 sacks, 23.5 tackles for loss, earned consensus All-American honors, and finished 6th in Heisman Trophy voting, an extraordinary achievement for a defensive lineman. His dominance culminated in the iconic Outback Bowl hit versus Michigan, a play that became one of the most replayed defensive highlights in college football history. Clowney made tackles, blew up game plans, forced double teams, rushed throws, and altered play calling before the snap. No one in Gamecocks ever commanded fear and attention the way Jadeveon Clowney did. Tennessee, Peyton Manning. Tennessee's return to national relevance was engineered by the command and intellect of Peyton Manning. He operated the offense like an on-field coach, diagnosing defenses, adjusting protections, and winning with timing and precision in an era that demanded it. Between 1994 to 1997, Manning elevated the Volunteers. He set the blueprint for modern quarterback control before spread systems made the position easier. His peak came in 1997 when he threw for 3,819 yards and 36 touchdowns, won the SEC Player of the Year, and finished second in Heisman Trophy voting. Under Manning, Tennessee won the SEC East 3 times, consistently competing for championships and setting the stage for the program's national title run immediately after his departure. In Tennessee, Manning did more than pile up stats. He professionalized the position in Knoxville, raising expectations for preparation, leadership, and execution. Texas A&M, Johnny Manziel. Texas A&M's arrival on the national stage was ignited by the chaos and confidence of Johnny Manziel. His improvisational brilliance turned broken plays into back-breaking highlights, forcing defenses to abandon structure and simply react. In addition to making the Aggies must-watch from 2012 to 2013, Manziel dragged them into the spotlight overnight, especially during their first unforgettable season in the SEC.
His 2012 season was seismic. Manziel won the Heisman Trophy as a freshman, threw for 3,706 yards, rushed for 1,410 yards, and accounted for 47 total touchdowns. He authored signature wins against Alabama and Oklahoma, shredding elite defenses with broken play magic that no scheme could contain. Manziel produced numbers for Texas A&Ms and changed the temperature of the program, the stadium, and the fan base in real time. A&M went from new SEC member to national headline because defenses couldn't plan for the unpredictable brilliance he brought snap to snap. Arizona State, Pat Tillman. Arizona State's edge in the late 1990s came from a refusal to bend, and Pat Tillman was the embodiment of that mindset. Every snap carried urgency, downhill reads, violent finishes, and a standard of effort that teammates followed without question. Between 1994 and 1997, Pat Tillman turned production into a mentality, setting the standard for how Arizona State played. He made toughness and accountability non-negotiable for the Sun Devils on every play. His peak came in 1997 when he earned Pac-10 Defensive Player of the Year honors and consensus All-American recognition, helping lead Arizona State to an 11-1 season and a Rose Bowl appearance. Tillman's production wasn't flashy by design. It was decisive, disciplined fits, violent tackles, and constant disruption that anchored one of the program's best teams ever. Tillman gave the program an identity rooted in effort, accountability, and sacrifice, turning preparation and toughness into competitive advantages. Boise State, Kellen Moore. Boise State's reputation for winning was built on execution, not hype, and Kellen Moore was the constant that made it sustainable. He played with measured tempo and total command, turning preparation and accuracy into a competitive equalizer against more talented rosters. From 2008 to 2011, Moore guided the Broncos through big moments. He normalized excellence and made national respect unavoidable. Moore finished his career with a staggering 50-3 record as a starter, threw for 14,667 yards, and accounted for 142 total touchdowns. He led Boise State to multiple undefeated seasons, a Fiesta Bowl win, and consistent top 10 finishes, becoming one of the most efficient and successful quarterbacks in college football history. In close games, late drives, and high-pressure moments, the outcome felt predetermined because of Moore's decision-making and command. With Kellen Moore, Boise State believed it could beat anyone. It expected to, and usually did. Indiana, Antwaan Randle El. Indiana football's rare moments of relevance were carved out through adaptability and nerve, with Antwaan Randle El serving as the engine behind them. He shifted roles seamlessly, throwing, running, creating on instinct, often turning disadvantage into opportunity against deeper, more powerful Big Ten opponents. From 1998 to 2001, Randle El wasn't simply the Hoosiers' best option, he was their margin for survival, carrying responsibility few players in the conference ever shouldered. His resume is unmatched in program history. Randle El threw for 7,469 yards, rushed for 3,895 yards, and accounted for 86 total touchdowns, becoming the first player in FBS history to pass for 7,000 yards and rush for 3,000. He earned Big Ten Freshman of the Year honors and delivered Indiana's most competitive stretch of the era almost single-handedly. Randle El's improvisation under constraint is what sets him apart. With defenses focused entirely on stopping him, he still found ways to create offense out of broken plays and thin margins. SMU, Eric Dickerson. SMU's surge into national relevance in the early 1980s was driven by effortless explosiveness, with Eric Dickerson setting the pace. His running style looked almost casual, yet defenders quickly learned how punishing that long striding speed could be once he reached the second level. Dickerson stood at the center of SMU's talent and pushed it into dominance during the 1979 to 1982 stretch. His peak came in 1982, when he rushed for 1,617 yards,
finished second in Heisman Trophy voting, and earned consensus All-American honors. Alongside Craig James, Dickerson helped lead SMU to a 10-0-1 regular season, a number 2 national ranking, and a reputation as one of the most dangerous teams in the country. Dickerson didn't need chaos or broken plays. He turned clean blocking into devastating results, gliding past defenders and flipping games with a single cut. No one at SMU ever made dominance look so effortless or elevated the program's national profile. Illinois. Dick Butkus. Illinois football revolved around intimidation and resolve during its hardest-hitting years, and Dick Butkus was the axis everything spun around. Every snap was confrontational. He attacked gaps, erased ball carriers, and imposed a physical tax that opponents felt long after the whistle. Butkus led the Illini defense during 1962 to 1964, and in the process, rewrote the linebacker position itself, setting a brutality and instinct standard the sport still measures against. His impact was immediate and overwhelming. Butkus was a 2-time consensus All-American, led the nation in tackles as a senior, and finished third in Heisman Trophy voting, a remarkable achievement for a defensive player. He anchored Illinois to a Big Ten title and a Rose Bowl appearance, commanding double teams and dictating how opponents attacked. At Illinois, Butkus always set the emotional temperature of games, forcing opponents to feel his presence early and often. Illinois has had great defenders, but no one ever owned the line of scrimmage and the psyche of opponents the way Dick Butkus did. Louisville. Lamar Jackson. Louisville's offense stopped resembling anything conventional once Lamar Jackson took over. Defenses weren't facing a scheme so much as a moving problem. Every snap carried the threat of a broken angle, a sudden escape, or a strike downfield. During his time at Louisville, Jackson elevated the Cardinals. He forced opponents to abandon normal preparation, turning unpredictability into Louisville's greatest weapon. His 2016 season was historic. Jackson won the Heisman Trophy, accounted for 51 total touchdowns, and became the first player in FBS history to throw for over 3,500 yards and rush for more than 1,500 in a single season. Week after week, he delivered jaw-dropping performances that forced national audiences to tune in. With Lamar, broken plays in Louisville became explosive gains, designed runs turned into track meets, and defenders constantly found themselves a step behind. He stretched the limits of defensive rules and reactions while at Louisville. Texas Tech. Patrick Mahomes. Texas Tech's version of the air raid became something unrecognizable once Patrick Mahomes took control. Plays refused to stay on schedule. Throws came from broken platforms, impossible angles, and moments where defenses believed they had already won. Between 2014 and 2016, Mahomes did more than light up the stat sheet. He expanded the boundaries of what quarterback creativity looked like in college football, turning fearlessness into an offensive identity. His peak came in 2016, when he threw for 5,052 yards, 41 touchdowns, and added over 500 rushing yards, despite little defensive or running game support. His legendary 734-yard, 5-touchdown performance versus Oklahoma remains one of the greatest single-game displays in college football history. Even when plays broke down, Mahomes' imagination kept them alive. With him under center, angles stopped mattering, coverage rules collapsed, and defenses were forced into survival mode. Utah. Alex Smith. Utah's leap from respected program to national outlier was guided by the composure and clarity of Alex Smith. He treated the offense like a solved puzzle, distributing the ball on time, protecting it relentlessly, and keeping the entire operation on schedule. Smith's execution of Urban Meyer's system between 2002 and 2004 was perfect. He validated it on a national stage, setting a new quarterback benchmark for the Mountain West and redefining how high Utah could climb. His defining 2004 season was historic. Smith threw for 2,952 yards, 32 touchdowns, and just 4 interceptions, led Utah to a 12-0 record, and capped it with a dominant Fiesta Bowl win over Pittsburgh. He finished 4th in Heisman Trophy voting and became the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft, the first in program history. In addition to winning games, he proved Utah belonged on the national stage, opening the door for future BCS wins, conference realignment, and Power 5 respect. Utah football changed tiers with Alex Smith under center. Baylor, Robert Griffin. Baylor's identity shifted from survival to belief once Robert Griffin III took control of the huddle. He brought speed that stressed every edge, accuracy that punished hesitation, and a confidence that spread through a program long accustomed to playing uphill. From 2008 to 2011, Griffin racked up highlights, altered expectations, turned Baylor into a team opponents had to take seriously every single week. His defining 2011 season was unforgettable. Griffin won the Heisman Trophy, threw for 4,293 yards, accounted for 47 total touchdowns, and led Baylor to a 10-3 record capped by a thrilling bowl win. His accuracy, deep ball touch, and explosive rushing ability made Baylor's offense a must-watch nationwide. Griffin's ignition under adversity defines him as Baylor's GOAT. He didn't inherit power, he created momentum, giving Baylor confidence, credibility, and a future blueprint. After RG3, Baylor football was no longer rebuilding, it was expecting to win. Kansas State, Darren Sproles. Kansas State's offense found its sharpest edge in efficiency and leverage, with Darren Sproles exploiting space that others couldn't see. His low center of gravity and instant acceleration turned small creases into chain-moving runs and sudden explosions, perfectly aligned with Bill Snyder's demand for precision. Sproles' 2001 to 2004 run at Kansas State showed how vision and speed, when fully leveraged, could erase size disadvantages and drive an offense. His defining moment came in 2003, when he rushed for 1,986 yards, finished 5th in Heisman Trophy voting, and led Kansas State to a Big 12 championship. Sproles followed that up with elite consistency, finishing his career with 4,979 rushing yards and delivering signature performances in the biggest games. Every carry by Sproles challenged assumptions about what a feature back should look like, and every big run reinforced the Wildcats' belief in precision over power. No one ever embodied the program's philosophy of efficiency, toughness, and overachievement like Darren Sproles. TCU, LaDainian Tomlinson. TCU's transition from overlooked to undeniable was fueled by volume and resolve, with LaDainian Tomlinson absorbing the weight of the offense without flinching. Defenses loaded the box, guessed the snap count, and still watched him dictate pace through patience, balance, and sudden acceleration. From 1997 to 2000, Tomlinson didn't rely on surprise. He relied on inevitability, carrying the Horned Frogs through change and announcing the program's arrival through sheer, unmissable production. His defining 1999 season remains one of the greatest ever by a running back. Tomlinson rushed for 2,158 yards, scored 22 touchdowns, and delivered the unforgettable 406-yard game versus UTEP, still one of the highest single-game totals in college football history. He finished his career with 5,263 rushing yards, setting school records across the board. Tomlinson produced dominance without the benefit of a wide-open system or stacked rosters, turning consistency into inevitability. Before TCU's modern rise, Tomlinson proved the program could feature a transcendent star, and everything that followed traced back to that proof. Georgia Tech, Calvin Johnson. Georgia Tech's offense rarely revolved around wide receivers, yet Calvin Johnson bent that reality on his own. Defensive game plans knew exactly where the ball was headed, and it still didn't matter. His size, speed, and body control erased coverage rules and matchup logic. Between 2004 and 2006, Calvin Johnson rose above a restrictive system, proving he was uncoverable even when isolation was the entire plan. During his career,
Johnson recorded 178 receptions, 2,927 receiving yards, and 28 touchdowns, earning consensus All-American honors in 2006. His production was even more impressive given Georgia Tech's run-heavy system, where opportunities were limited and every target came with maximum defensive attention. Johnson didn't benefit from volume or scheme. He overpowered structure itself, winning jump balls, double coverage, and leverage battles with ease. No player in Georgia Tech ever bent the offense around individual excellence the way Calvin Johnson did. Iowa, Chuck Long. Iowa's climb into the national conversation during the mid-1980s was powered by steadiness under center, with Chuck Long providing the control it demanded. He delivered dependable, high-level quarterback play, pairing confidence with smart decision-making in a program that valued structure and toughness. From 1981 to 1985, Long didn't overwhelm opponents with flash. He elevated the Hawkeyes through consistency, leadership, and a level of reliability that defined Iowa football at its best. His peak came in 1985, when he threw for 3,022 yards, led Iowa to a Big Ten title, and finished second in Heisman Trophy voting. Long was a two-time All-American and engineered multiple top 10 finishes, proving Iowa could compete nationally through smart, efficient offense. Long didn't rely on flash or chaos. He commanded structure, maximizing every advantage and minimizing mistakes. Chuck Long guided the program with such calm authority at quarterback, something that is yet to be repeated till today. Kansas, Gale Sayers. Kansas football's most electric moments were born from suddenness and grace, with Gale Sayers supplying both in equal measure. His balance let him glide through traffic, while his acceleration punished even the slightest defensive misstep. Between 1962 and 1964, Gale Sayers moved from offensive centerpiece to pure game changer, flipping momentum with a single cut and redefining excitement on every touch. His production was elite for the era. Sayers rushed for over 3,900 yards, scored 39 total touchdowns, earned consensus All-American honors, and finished third in Heisman Trophy voting. He led Kansas to multiple winning seasons, and Kansas played in the 1961 Bluebonnet Bowl, standing out even against the best defenses in the country. In addition to gaining yards, Sayers changed angles and expectations, forcing defenders to miss in ways that felt inevitable. At Kansas, he made excellence look so effortless or timeless. Minnesota, Bronco Nagurski. Minnesota football's early dominance was built on raw force and adaptability, with Bronco Nagurski serving as its foundation. He lined up wherever he was needed and overwhelmed opponents through sheer strength, endurance, and an unforgiving style of play. From 1927 to 1929, Nagurski was more than a star of his era. He set the physical identity of the Golden Gophers, anchoring a legacy that helped define college football's formative years. His era was historic. Nagurski was a consensus All-American, finished third in Heisman Trophy voting, and helped lead Minnesota to a national championship during a stretch when the program stood among the sport's elite. As a fullback, linebacker, and occasional passer, he was a one-man advantage in an era built on physical control. In addition to being great in his time, Nagurski became the standard by which toughness and dominance were measured, to the point the nation's top defensive award bears his name. Washington, Steve Emtman. Washington's dominance up front during its golden run was enforced by sheer disruption, with Steve Emtman collapsing games from the inside out. He played with a rare blend of explosion and strength, winning immediately off the snap and turning clean pockets into emergencies. Between 1988 and 1991, Emtman anchored the Huskies' defense, dictated how offenses had to function, and took control of the line of scrimmage, making it Washington's greatest advantage. His peak came in 1991, when he recorded 20.5 tackles for loss, won the Outland Trophy, earned consensus All-American honors, and helped lead Washington to a national championship. Even while battling injuries, Emtman's impact was undeniable,
drawing constant double teams and still disrupting game plans weekly. Entman's force concentration made him stand out. He compressed entire offenses toward him, freeing teammates and dictating how opponents blocked before the snap. No one ever tilted the field so dramatically from the defensive end the way Steve Emtman did at Washington. BYU, Ty Detmer. BYU's offensive identity became synonymous with precision and nerve under Ty Detmer. He thrived in a system that offered no hiding places for a quarterback, demanding instant decisions, tight window throws, and total confidence on every snap. From 1988 to 1991, Detmer did more than pilot the Cougars' attack. He turned timing and accuracy into a national signature, making elite passing the foundation of BYU football. His defining moment came in 1990 when he won the Heisman Trophy after throwing for 5,188 yards and 41 touchdowns, becoming one of the most prolific passers of his era. Detmer finished his career with over 15,000 passing yards, earned consensus All-American honors, and led BYU to multiple top 10 finishes. Detmer didn't rely on overwhelming athleticism. He won with rhythm and trust, turning the passing game into a communal machine where everyone ate. He conducted BYU's offense with such surgical harmony. Duke, Sonny Jurgensen. Duke football found an unexpected offensive voice in Sonny Jurgensen, a quarterback whose arm talent cut against the grain of his era. While much of college football leaned conservative, he played with confidence and a willingness to stretch the field, giving the Blue Devils a level of credibility few expected. In the 2 years he was at Duke, Jurgensen did more than lead them. He reframed what the program could be, pairing toughness and intellect with genuine offensive ambition. His defining 1955 season saw Duke go 8-2, win the ACC, and earn a Cotton Bowl victory, with Jurgensen earning All-American honors. He threw with accuracy and aggression, guiding Duke to one of the most successful stretches in program history, and proving the Blue Devils could win with high-level quarterback play. With Jurgensen, Duke's football ceiling expanded. He helped show that elite quarterbacking and national relevance were possible in Durham. He altered the program's perception through pure quarterback excellence. Missouri, Chase Daniel. Missouri's offensive ceiling was rewritten through rhythm and belief, with Chase Daniel orchestrating every surge. He played fast without panic, spreading the field and sustaining pressure until opponents cracked, all while keeping the operation sharp and on schedule. Between 2005 and 2008, Daniel turned every Saturday into a spectacle. He made explosiveness routine, turning the Tigers into a weekly Big 12 problem and a genuine national presence. His defining season came in 2007, when he threw for 4,306 yards and 33 touchdowns, finished fourth in Heisman Trophy voting, and led Missouri to a 12-2 record with a #1 national ranking during the season. That year included statement wins over Kansas and Arkansas, showcasing an offense that could overwhelm elite competition. In Missouri, Daniel sped the game up for everyone else, snapping the ball quickly, distributing it decisively, and forcing defenses into constant reaction mode. He changed the pace and ambition of the program during his time at Missouri. Syracuse, Jim Brown. Syracuse football reached a different plane of possibility when Jim Brown had the ball in his hands. Defenders weren't just beaten, they were overpowered, outrun, and erased by a blend of size and speed the sport had never encountered before. From 1954 to 1956, Brown didn't simply anchor the Orange offense. He altered expectations entirely, turning Syracuse into a national force whenever he stepped onto the field. His resume is staggering. Brown won the Heisman Trophy, 1956, was a consensus All-American, and led the nation in rushing while also starring as a kick returner and defensive back. He finished his career with 2,091 rushing yards in an era with shorter seasons and far fewer carries, routinely overwhelming defenses that sold out to stop him. Jim Brown's inevitability through superiority is what sets him apart and ultimately makes him Syracuse's GOAT. He didn't rely on scheme or surprise. He overpowered preparation itself, forcing opponents to accept limits rather than solutions. Vanderbilt, Jay Cutler. Vanderbilt stayed afloat in the SEC by leaning on raw arm talent and resilience, with Jay Cutler absorbing pressure most quarterbacks never faced. Protection often broke down, defenses were faster and deeper, and the margin for error was razor thin, yet he kept attacking vertically, refusing to play small. From 2002 to 2005, Cutler didn't need ideal conditions to matter. He gave the Commodores credibility through bold throws, toughness, and a willingness to challenge elite opponents head-on. His production came under constant pressure. Cutler threw for 7,353 yards and 59 touchdowns, earned all SEC honors, and engineered some of Vanderbilt's most memorable wins of the era, often against more talented rosters. His ability to make NFL-level throws in tight windows stood out even when the scoreboard didn't always cooperate. Cutler didn't elevate a powerhouse. He refused to let the program disappear, standing tall in hostile environments and attacking defenses that expected Vanderbilt to fold. No one in Vanderbilt ever fought the league itself snap after snap the way Jay Cutler did. Auburn, Bo Jackson. Auburn's offense bent around raw force and inevitability whenever Bo Jackson touched the ball. His strides erased angles, his power punished hesitation, and his presence alone changed how defenses aligned before the snap. During the 1982 to 1985 stretch, Jackson created explosive plays. He delivered shock, turning ordinary handoffs into moments that deflated opponents and shifted games in an instant. His defining 1985 season was legendary. Jackson won the Heisman Trophy, rushed for 1,786 yards, and delivered iconic performances against elite competition, including his famous game-winning run against Alabama. Every defense knew Auburn's plan, and none could stop it when Bo hit the second level. By doing the unthinkable, Bo Jackson cemented his status as Auburn's GOAT. His plays did more than gain yards. They broke the rules of expectation, forcing fans and opponents alike to question what was physically possible. Jackson felt inevitable the moment he touched the ball. Florida State, Deion Sanders. Florida State's climb into national prominence was fueled by confidence on an island, with Deion Sanders daring quarterbacks to test him. Most didn't, and those who did learned quickly how small the field becomes when one side is erased. From 1985 to 1988, Sanders did more than covering receivers. He dictated offensive decisions, turning speed, swagger, and playmaking into the Seminoles' defining edge. His impact was immediate and constant. Sanders was a two-time consensus All-American, recorded multiple interceptions, and was a game-changer on punt returns, often flipping momentum in a single burst. He finished 8th in Heisman Trophy voting, 1988, rare air for a defensive back, and became the prototype for elite corners that followed. With Sanders' intimidation through confidence was visible throughout his time at Florida State. Before the snap, receivers felt beat. After the snap, quarterbacks avoided him altogether. He controlled space, attention, and psychology. NC State, Russell Wilson. NC State's offense reached its most controlled and effective form under the steady command of Russell Wilson. He minimized chaos, maximized efficiency, and treated every possession with purpose, turning smart decisions and pinpoint accuracy into a weekly advantage. From 2008 to 2010, Wilson didn't overwhelm opponents with volume. He beat them with precision, leadership, and a level of consistency that made the Wolfpack a reliable ACC threat. His peak came in 2010, when he threw for 3,563 yards, 28 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions, earning all ACC honors and leading NC State to a 9-4 record. Across 3 seasons, Wilson accounted for more than 9,000 total yards and consistently delivered in high-pressure situations with calm command. Wilson maximized every possession, minimized mistakes, and made winning feel repeatable rather than fragile. He did all these while turning efficiency into a defining identity for the program. Virginia Tech, Michael Vick. Virginia Tech became impossible to ignore the moment Michael Vick took the field. Defensive structure collapsed under the threat of his legs and arm, as hesitation anywhere turned into an instant disaster. Between 1999 and 2000, Vick distorted preparation itself, forcing opponents to defend every blade of grass and redefining what the quarterback position could look like in college football. His defining moment came in 1999 when he led Virginia Tech to an undefeated regular season and a national championship game appearance as a redshirt freshman. Vick finished third in Heisman Trophy voting, threw for explosive gains, and ran past angles that simply didn't exist before him, making the Hokies a true national draw. He attacked defenses, broke their structure, turned contained schemes into guesses, and coverage into chaos, because one wrong angle meant 6 points. The Hokies have fielded physical teams and elite units over the years, but no player ever forced opponents to rebuild their entire game plan the way Vick did. Nebraska, Tommy Frazier. Nebraska's option dynasty reached its purest form through control and force, with Tommy Frazier directing everything at its center. He played the position like a power runner with a quarterback's composure, absorbing contact, making the right read, and never letting chaos creep in. From 1992 to 1995, Frazier didn't operate the system. He defined what it looked like in motion, steering one of the most physically dominant and disciplined teams college football has ever produced. His defining season came in 1995 when Nebraska went 12-0 and is widely considered one of the greatest teams in college football history. Frazier led the Huskers to a national championship, capped by his iconic 75-yard touchdown run versus Florida in the Fiesta Bowl, and finished his career with 2 national titles and a staggering 33-3 record as a starter. At Nebraska, Frazier was more than just the quarterback of the system. He was the physical expression of it, running through linebackers, executing with precision, and breaking opponents' resolve by the third quarter. USC, Reggie Bush. USC's offense became an exercise in chaos control once Reggie Bush entered the equation. He wasn't confined to traditional roles. Motion, space, and mismatches followed him everywhere, forcing defenses to react instead of anticipate. Across 2 seasons, Bush did more than create big plays. He fractured game plans entirely, turning speed, agility, and receiving skill into a constant threat that no preparation could fully contain. His 2005 season was electric. Bush accounted for 2,611 all-purpose yards, scored 18 touchdowns, and won the Heisman Trophy, while helping lead USC to a national championship game appearance and an era of near-total Pac-10 dominance. Every touch felt dangerous. Runs, screens, returns, all capable of flipping games instantly. Reggie Bush was volatility itself at USC, and the GOAT because of it. He moved the chains, detonated structure, forced missed tackles in space, and turned broken containment into highlights that shifted momentum and belief. Wisconsin, Ron Dayne. Wisconsin's rise was built on endurance and resolve, and Ron Dayne was the embodiment of both. Games slowed to his pace as defenses absorbed carry after carry, knowing what was coming and still failing to stop it. From 1996 to 1999, Dayne thrived in freezing afternoons and grinded out battles, turning physical football into a certainty and making the Badgers a national power through sheer, punishing consistency. His resume is historic. Dayne finished his career as the NCAA's all-time leading rusher at the time with 6,397 yards, won the Heisman Trophy in 1999, and led Wisconsin to 3 Rose Bowl appearances. Season after season, defenses loaded the box knowing what was coming, and still couldn't stop him. His inevitability is what sets him apart. Everyone in the stadium knew the ball was coming his way, and it still didn't matter. Carry by carry, he drained defenses until resistance simply disappeared. Dane managed to make brute strength feel so unavoidable and dominance feel so routine. Liberty, Malik Willis. Liberty's leap from curiosity to national talking point was fueled by constant pressure, with Malik Willis forcing defenses to defend every second of every play. His game thrived on stress, explosive scrambles, fearless deep shots, and an attacking mindset that never allowed opponents to settle. Willis's 2019 to 2021 run turned Liberty into a problem opponents couldn't ignore, built on explosiveness and fearless play. His peak came in 2021, when he threw for 2,857 yards, rushed for 878 yards, and accounted for 40 total touchdowns, earning Conference USA Offensive Player of the Year honors. Willis led Liberty to marquee wins over Power 5 opponents, proving the Flames could compete physically and athletically at the highest level. At Liberty, Willis didn't play to survive matchups. He challenged them, attacking elite defenses with confidence and improvisation. Even with the growth that Liberty has shown over the years, no one ever expanded its national ceiling with such bold individual force as Malik Willis did. Memphis. D'Angelo Williams. Memphis's offense revolved around persistence and payoff, with D'Angelo Williams absorbing attention and still breaking through it. Defenses committed bodies, adjusted fronts, and keyed every snap toward him, yet his balance and burst kept finding daylight. From 2002 to 2005, Williams was the Tigers' primary weapon, their constant, producing elite output under maximum focus and carrying Memphis through its most competitive stretch with durability and resolve. His production was historic. Williams rushed for 6,026 yards, scored 58 touchdowns, and earned Conference USA Player of the Year honors, finishing his career as one of the most productive running backs in college football history. Even against loaded boxes and constant contact, he consistently broke free for chunk plays and long touchdowns. Endurance paired with excellence defines D'Angelo Williams as Memphis's greatest player. His dominance wasn't fleeting or tied to a single breakout year. It was sustained, delivered season after season without decline despite a heavy workload. No one else at Memphis ever matched his combination of longevity, production, and day-to-day reliability. James Madison. Vaughn Lee. James Madison's final step from contender to champion required a quarterback who could change games on command, and Vaughn Lee provided that edge. His explosiveness stressed defenses horizontally and vertically, while his confidence in big moments kept the offense aggressive deep into the postseason. Between 2012 and 2015, Lee was a dual-threat playmaker for James Madison, the bridge between consistency and titles, helping push the Dukes toward the national championship level they ultimately reached. Lee helped push JMU to national title contention, laying the foundation for the championship breakthrough that followed. He accounted for over 7,000 total yards in his career, rushed for 2,000-plus yards, and delivered clutch performances throughout the playoff run, proving he could win both with structure and improvisation. Lee James wasn't confined to a single role. He could steady an offense when games tightened, and then instantly flip momentum when space appeared, giving JMU answers in every situation. No one at Madison ever paired creative freedom with championship-level command the way Lee did. Toledo. Chester Taylor. Toledo's most reliable stretches were built on control and punishment, with Chester Taylor driving everything between the tackles. He ran with a downhill mindset, pairing size and vision to keep the offense on schedule and wear defenses down over 4 quarters. Taylor led the Rockets in production during 1998 to 2001, then anchored them with reliability and toughness. His peak came in 2001, when he rushed for 1,468 yards and 18 touchdowns, earning MAC Offensive Player of the Year honors. Taylor finished his career with 4,555 rushing yards, still among the best totals in program history, and consistently delivered in conference play where Toledo imposed its will. At Toledo, Taylor racked up yards. He established physical dominance early, forcing defenses to adjust and wear down as games progressed. This made the Rockets' identity feel so firm and inevitable. Tulane. Sean King. Tulane's greatest season demanded nerve and composure, and Sean King supplied both when the margin was thinnest. He absorbed pressure, extended plays with his legs, and stayed poised when games tightened, giving the Green Wave a steady hand in moments that usually decide seasons. During the 1995-98 seasons, King led Tulane into national relevance with toughness, mobility, and command in high-pressure moments. Sean King flirted with greatness the minute he joined Tulane's football program. He closed the door on doubt, delivering perfection when it mattered most and leaving no room for what-ifs. Till today, no one ever finished a season with such complete authority as Sean King did. University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Randall Cunningham. University of Nevada, Las Vegas's offense became impossible to forecast once Randall Cunningham stepped behind center. His combination of elite speed and a powerful arm erased structure, turning broken plays into advantages and forcing defenses to defend space rather than assignments. Cunningham elevated University of Nevada, Las Vegas during the 1982-84 stretch, giving the Rebels national relevance through sheer unpredictability. His peak came in 1984, when he threw for 3,466 yards, rushed for 942 yards, and accounted for 37 total touchdowns, finishing 6th in Heisman Trophy voting. Cunningham's ability to escape pressure and create explosive plays made every snap dangerous, even when protection broke down. Cunningham's originality sets him apart from every quarterback who's played for University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He ran or threw. He invented solutions on the fly, making improvisation a strategic weapon before it was widely accepted in college football and the NFL. He helped expand the imagination of what the offense could be. Cincinnati. Travis Kelce. Cincinnati's offense gained a new dimension when Travis Kelce emerged as a problem defenses couldn't sort out. Too physical for defensive backs and too agile for linebackers, he forced mismatches before the ball was even snapped. Kelce elevated Cincinnati from 2008 to 2012 by making the tight end position a constant mismatch opponents couldn't solve. His defining season came in 2012 when he caught 45 passes for 722 yards and 8 touchdowns, earning first-team All-Big East honors and anchoring an offense that won a conference championship. His size, hands, and run-after-catch ability forced defenses to adjust personnel and coverage schemes just to contain him. Evolution defines Travis Kelce as Cincinnati's greatest player in the modern era. He wasn't merely productive within the scheme, he expanded it, turning the middle of the field into a constant dilemma and forcing defenses to choose between bad options. He reshaped positional value, or warped matchup dynamics throughout his playing time at Cincinnati. Colorado. Rashaan Salaam. Rashaan Salaam stands as the defining figure in Colorado football history, the bruising centerpiece who powered the Buffaloes through their most commanding modern run. At his peak, he blended strength and explosion with an unrelenting motor, giving Colorado an offense that dictated terms through physical dominance and controlled pace. During the 1993-94 stretch, Rashaan Salaam was more than just productive. He was the engine that made the program's dominance possible. His defining 1994 season was historic. Salaam rushed for 2,055 yards, won the Heisman Trophy, and led Colorado to an 11-1 record and a top-5 national finish. Week after week, he punished stacked boxes with downhill authority, turning 4-yard runs into back-breaking gains and closing games with certainty. Salaam's legacy as Colorado's GOAT is defined by closure. In addition to having a great year, he completed a championship-caliber identity, giving Colorado a season so emphatic it stands alone in the program's history. The Buffaloes have had stars before and since, but no one ever sealed an era with such final, undeniable dominance as Rashaan Salaam did. Houston. Andre Ware. Houston became the sport's testing ground for offensive imagination once Andre Ware took control. The ball came out fast, space appeared everywhere, and defenses quickly realized traditional rules no longer applied. The run and shoot reached its most influential form during Ware's 1987 to 1989 run, placing Houston at the heart of the sport's offensive evolution. His defining 1989 season changed the sport. Ware threw for 4,699 yards, 46 touchdowns, won the Heisman Trophy, and earned consensus All-American honors. Night after night, he dissected coverages with precision, forcing opponents to abandon conventional defensive looks just to survive the onslaught. Ware's legacy as Houston's GOAT is disruption at scale. He did more than put up numbers. He normalized the future, accelerating the acceptance of pass-heavy offenses across college football. Houston has had explosive teams, but no one ever pushed the game's evolution forward from the pocket the way Andre Ware did. North Carolina, Lawrence Taylor. North Carolina's defense became an exercise in disruption once Lawrence Taylor lined up on the edge. His first step shattered blocking schemes, and his instincts turned pressure into inevitability, forcing offenses to speed up before they were ready. From 1977 to 1980, Taylor didn't simply anchor the Tar Heels, he changed the geometry of the field, redefining how edge defenders could dominate games in ways opponents had no real answer for. His peak came in 1980, when he was named a consensus All-American and finished second in Defensive Player of the Year voting at the collegiate level. Taylor recorded 16 sacks in an era when sack totals weren't even officially tracked, consistently overwhelming tackles and forcing quarterbacks into rushed decisions. Taylor didn't simply overwhelm opponents. He introduced a new level of defensive urgency, where edge speed became something offenses had to plan around from the first snap rather than react to mid-game. He altered football's defensive blueprint and reshaped priorities across the sport, making him North Carolina's GOAT. Pittsburgh, Dan Marino. Pittsburgh's offense earned instant credibility through fearlessness in the pocket, with Dan Marino challenging defenses vertically before that style was common. His lightning-quick release neutralized pressure, and his confidence allowed the Panthers to attack in an era built on caution. Marino's 1979 to 1982 stretch carved out Pitt's offensive identity in an unforgiving era, built on accuracy and fearless execution. His defining stretch came in 1981, when he threw for 2,876 yards and 37 touchdowns, setting then records and earning All-American honors. Marino led Pitt to a #1 national ranking during the season, repeatedly winning shootouts against top competition with precision and confidence that separated him from his peers. At Pittsburgh, Dan Marino attacked defenses instead of steering around them, firing the ball on rhythm and daring opponents to survive throws that arrived before coverage could settle. No one in a Panthers uniform has made the passing game feel so commanding or turned decisive aggression into something that felt unavoidable, the way Marino did. Rutgers, Ray Rice. Rutgers' rise from local respect to national notice was powered through the middle of the field, with Ray Rice setting the tempo. He ran with a compact, violent style that paired balance and burst, punishing defenders while still breaking free when space appeared. Across the 2005 to 2007 season, Rice was the centerpiece of the offense. He was the reason Rutgers finally mattered on a national stage, carrying the Scarlet Knights into relevance with consistency and force. His defining 2006 season delivered a breakthrough. Rice rushed for 1,794 yards, scored 20 touchdowns, earned first-team All-Big East honors, and helped lead Rutgers to an 11-2 record, capped by a bowl win and a top 15 finish. He followed it with another elite year, finishing his career with 4,926 rushing yards, the highest total in program history. Rice brought credibility and became Rutgers' GOAT. Not only did he post big numbers, he validated the program, giving Rutgers an identity built on toughness and reliability that opponents had to respect. The Scarlet Knights have grown since, but no one ever shifted how the country viewed Rutgers football the way Ray Rice did. Virginia, Tiki Barber. Virginia's offense gained flexibility and spark through movement and space, with Tiki Barber supplying both without sacrificing toughness. He thrived in open field situations, reading leverage and slipping tackles, yet still handled the grind between the tackles when games tightened. From 1994 to 1996, Barber wasn't simply a feature back. He was a multi-purpose solution, giving the Cavaliers balance, explosiveness, and reliability in an offense that demanded all three. His production set the standard at Virginia. Barber rushed for 3,389 yards, caught 112 passes, and scored 31 total touchdowns, earning first-team All-ACC honors. He was a constant mismatch, equally dangerous on draws, screens, and wheel routes, forcing defenses to account for him on every down. Barber's legacy as Virginia's GOAT is built on elasticity. He stretched defenses without breaking structure, giving the offense answers regardless of coverage or game flow. Virginia has had strong teams and standout players, but no one ever expanded the playbook's flexibility and rhythm the way Tiki Barber did. Arkansas, Darren McFadden. Arkansas's offense revolved around force and urgency, with Darren McFadden daring defenses to survive 4 quarters of contact. Boxes were stacked, gaps were crowded, and the assignment was obvious. Yet his acceleration and authority still broke games open. From 2005 to 2007, McFadden did more than handle the load, he imposed it, carrying the Razorbacks through the SEC by turning speed and violence into a weekly advantage. His peak spanned 2 historic seasons. McFadden rushed for 4,590 career yards, scored 41 touchdowns, and finished second in Heisman Trophy voting twice, 2006, 2007. He led Arkansas to signature wins over top-ranked opponents, including LSU, and routinely delivered big performances in the conference's toughest games. McFadden dominated under pressure, cementing his status as Arkansas's GOAT. He did more than produce numbers. He answered the SEC's physical challenge head-on, breaking angles, outrunning pursuit, and sustaining excellence across multiple seasons. Arkansas has had great backs, but no one ever stood toe-to-toe with the league and consistently won the way Darren McFadden did. Boston College, Doug Flutie. Boston College's ceiling shifted the moment Doug Flutie decided games would bend to his will. He played on instinct and intellect, extending plays, daring tight windows, and refusing to accept limitations others assumed were fixed. From 1981 to 1984, not only did Flutie engineer unforgettable moments, he rewired belief itself, pulling the Eagles past expectation and into a place they hadn't been before through nerve, creativity, and competitive fire. His defining 1984 season was legendary. Flutie threw for 3,454 yards, won the Heisman Trophy, and authored the immortal Hail Mary versus Miami, a play that instantly elevated Boston College into the national consciousness. That season was more than productive, it was transformational. Flutie played with audacity under pressure, cementing his status as Boston College's GOAT. He didn't wait for perfect conditions. He created advantage from chaos, trusting instinct when structure collapsed. Boston College has had strong teams since, but no one ever proved possibility so dramatically in a single moment as Doug Flutie did. Aaron Rodgers. Cal's offense gained teeth through restraint and ruthless accuracy, with Aaron Rodgers turning small advantages into decisive outcomes. He played as if every snap mattered, identifying leverage, delivering on time, and refusing to give defenses extra chances. From 2003 to 2004, Rodgers didn't need volume to dominate. He elevated the Golden Bears by making efficiency a weapon, and precision the reason Cal stepped onto the national stage. His defining 2004 season showcased surgical control. Rodgers threw for 2,566 yards, 24 touchdowns, and just 8 interceptions, set an NCAA record by completing 23 consecutive passes, and led Cal to a 10-1 regular season and a top 10 finish. The offense didn't rely on chaos. It relied on Rodgers' timing, reads, and ball placement. Rodgers' legacy as Cal's GOAT is built on purity of execution. He compressed risk to almost nothing, turning the quarterback position into a math problem defenses couldn't solve. Cal has had strong passers and big seasons, but no one ever made excellence feel so repeatable and exact as Aaron Rodgers did. Kentucky, Tim Couch. Kentucky's offensive ceiling was shattered by volume and audacity, with Tim Couch dragging the Wildcats into a future they hadn't touched before. He threw relentlessly, trusted tight windows, and kept attacking even when defenses knew exactly what was coming. From 1996 to 1998, Couch did more than thrive in Hal Mummy's air raid. He proved Kentucky could survive and matter in the SEC through the air, rewriting what the program believed was possible. His defining 1998 season was historic. Couch threw for 4,275 yards and 36 touchdowns, finished fourth in Heisman Trophy voting, and earned consensus All-American honors. He led Kentucky to a 7-5 record, highlighted by a dramatic comeback win over LSU, showcasing clutch poise alongside volume passing. Tim Couch is Kentucky's GOAT because he shattered the program's old limits. Before him, Kentucky adapted to the SEC. With him, the SEC had to adapt to Kentucky. His impact rewired how the program thought about offense and what it could demand from opponents. The Wildcats have built strong teams since, but no one else ever altered the program's identity with the same speed or permanence. Maryland, Boomer Esiason. Maryland's climb toward national respect was guided by conviction under center, with Boomer Esiason giving the program its edge. He played with toughness and authority, attacking defenses with arm talent while keeping the huddle steady in high-pressure moments. From 1980 to 1983, in addition to running the Terrapins' offense, Esiason gave Maryland belief and legitimacy, proving it could line up and compete with anyone on the schedule. His defining 1983 season cemented his legacy. Esiason threw for 3,248 yards, led Maryland to an 8-4 record, and authored the legendary comeback versus Miami, rallying the Terps from a massive deficit in one of college football's most famous finishes. He earned a CC Player of the Year honors and finished fourth in Heisman Trophy voting. Boomer Esiason earns his place as Maryland's GOAT because he refused to let games decide themselves. When pressure mounted and momentum shifted, he stayed bold, attacking windows others avoided and forcing opponents back onto their heels. His presence changed the emotional temperature of games. Maryland has fielded talented quarterbacks before, but no one else ever bent chaos back in their favor the way Esiason did. Michigan State, Kirk Cousins. Michigan State's turnaround hinged on trust and repetition, with Kirk Cousins supplying both from the pocket. He wasn't flashy, but he was exact, delivering throws on time, managing games with discipline, and keeping the offense steady when momentum mattered most. From 2007 to 2011, Cousins stabilized the quarterback position, restoring belief and guiding the Spartans from uncertainty to consistent national relevance. His defining 2010 season showcased his control and competitiveness. Cousins threw for 2,825 yards, led Michigan State to an 11-2 record, won a share of the Big Ten title, and capped the year with a dramatic Cotton Bowl victory. He finished his career as the program's all-time leader in passing yards and touchdowns at the time, delivering reliable production in high-pressure moments. Kirk Cousins is Michigan State's GOAT because he became the program's anchor. His value wasn't built on spectacle, but on control, the kind that turns belief into habit and wins into expectation. With Cousins, success didn't feel fragile or fleeting. It felt organized, intentional, and durable. Michigan State has had stars who burned bright, but no one else ever gave the program the same sense of direction, confidence, and long-term steadiness. UCLA, Troy Aikman. UCLA's modern apex was reached through quiet control and surgical execution, with Troy Aikman setting the tempo the moment he arrived in Westwood. After transferring in, he brought polish and command that immediately raised the program's ceiling, winning from the pocket with timing,
accuracy, and total command of the offense. Beginning in 1988, Aikman didn't overwhelm opponents with chaos. He dismantled them with composure, delivering the Bruins their highest modern peak through big game control and quarterback maturity well beyond his years. His defining 1988 season was historic. Aikman led UCLA to a 10-2 record, a Pac-10 championship, and a #1 national ranking during the season, finishing third in Heisman Trophy voting. He threw for 3,318 yards, orchestrated a signature win over USC, and capped the year with a Rose Bowl victory that sealed UCLA's place atop the college football conversation. Troy Aikman did more than just raise UCLA's level, he quietly redefined its limits. His greatness wasn't loud or chaotic, it was controlled, efficient, and precise, the kind that makes elite football look routine. Every big moment felt measured, every win felt intentional. UCLA has seen talented rosters and memorable seasons, but no one else ever made the program's highest gear look so natural, so sustainable, and so complete.
Air Force, Chad Hennings. Discipline and dominance defined Air Force football at its peak, anchored by Chad Hennings on the defensive front. A rare interior force, he controlled the line of scrimmage with strength, leverage, and precision while balancing the full demands of military service. From 1984 to 1987, Hennings thrived in a program built on accountability and execution, embodying the standard of excellence that separates Air Force from everyone else. His resume is unmatched in Service Academy history. Hennings was a consensus All-American, finished 5th in Heisman Trophy voting, 1987, and recorded 24 sacks in his career. He led Air Force to a 12-1 season and a #5 national ranking in 1985, proving the Falcons could compete with and beat the nation's best. Hennings earns his place as Air Force's GOAT through dual excellence. He was dominant between the lines while simultaneously carrying the weight of active duty service, delaying a pro career to serve first. Air Force football has seen great leaders and hard-nosed teams, but no one embodied excellence, discipline, and responsibility like Hennings. Army, Glenn Davis. Army football's greatest era was driven by speed and precision, with Glenn Davis at its core. An explosive halfback with track-level acceleration, sharp vision, and real toughness, he powered an offense that overwhelmed opponents through tempo and execution. From 1944 to 1946, Davis wasn't simply a star on elite teams. He was the catalyst that made the Black Knights' dominance unavoidable. His resume is historic. Davis won the Heisman Trophy in 1946, was a 3-time consensus All-American, and helped lead Army to 3 consecutive national championships. He scored 59 touchdowns in just 3 seasons and routinely turned routine plays into breakaway scores behind an offense that felt unstoppable. Glenn Davis stands alone as Army's GOAT because his greatness extended far beyond West Point. He was the driving force behind one of the most powerful dynasties in college football history, at a time when Army ruled the sport. Plenty have served the program proudly, but no player ever lifted Army football to the heights Davis reached. Alabama Crimson Tide, 2008 to present. Alabama's modern dynasty begins with a program trying to remember who it was supposed to be. When Nick Saban arrived in 2007, Alabama still had its trophies, but not its authority. The program had talent, but no identity. Discipline wavered. Consistency was gone. Saban didn't promise instant championships. He promised control. By 2008, that control was already visible. Alabama was suffocating teams. The offense was conservative but precise. The defense overwhelmed opponents snap after snap. Alabama reached the SEC championship game and played Florida for a national title berth. They lost, but the loss didn't feel like a setback. It felt like a warning shot. The foundation was in place. The warning became reality in 2009. That season was built around imposing will. Mark Ingram carried the offense behind a dominant line, winning the program's first Heisman Trophy. Alabama beat Florida in the SEC championship game, then dismantled Texas for the national title. The message was simple. Alabama didn't need gimmicks. It would beat you physically and patiently. The next season tested whether this was sustainable or fleeting. In 2010, Alabama lost 3 regular season games and fell out of the title picture. For most programs, that would have signaled regression. Instead, Alabama treated it as refinement. Recruiting didn't slip. The standard didn't change. The machine stayed intact. By 2011, the defense reached something close to perfection. Alabama lost a tight regular season game to LSU, then got a second chance in the national championship. This time, Alabama erased LSU completely, winning 21-0 without allowing a touchdown. That team allowed fewer than 9 points per game all season. In 2012, Alabama confirmed it wasn't peaking. Behind a deeper roster and a more balanced offense, Alabama rolled through the schedule and defeated Notre Dame in the national championship. 3 titles in 4 years placed Saban into rare historical territory. Alabama was becoming a dynasty. Then came the moment that reminded everyone dominance doesn't remove chaos. In 2013, Alabama entered the Iron Bowl undefeated. A missed field goal returned for a touchdown ended the season instantly. The kick six became one of the most replayed moments in college football history. Alabama didn't collapse afterward. It recalibrated. The playoff era forced another evolution. In 2014, Alabama reached the first college football playoff, but was outpaced by Ohio State's speed and creativity. The lesson was clear. Physical dominance alone was no longer enough. That lesson shaped the next phase. In 2015, Alabama leaned into power one last time. Derrick Henry carried the offense relentlessly, winning the Heisman Trophy and dragging Alabama to another national title. It was a reminder that power still mattered, but it couldn't be the only answer anymore. By 2016, transition was underway. Jalen Hurts led Alabama with composure and athleticism, but the offense remained limited. Alabama reached the national championship again and lost to Clemson at the last moment. The dynasty was approaching a crossroads. That crossroads arrived in 2017. Trailing at halftime of the national championship, Saban made the defining decision of the dynasty. He benched Hurts and inserted true freshman Tua Tagovailoa. Tua threw the game-winning touchdown in overtime. That moment symbolized everything about Alabama's longevity. No attachment, no sentiment, only adaptation. From there, Alabama fully embraced transformation. In 2018, the offense became explosive. Tua, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, and Devontae Smith overwhelmed defenses weekly. Alabama reached the championship again, only to be outplayed by Clemson. It was proof that the margin had narrowed. In 2019, injuries exposed vulnerability. Alabama missed the playoff for the first time. For the first time in a decade, the dynasty felt human. The response was immediate. In 2020, Alabama produced its most complete team ever. The offense shattered records. Devontae Smith became the first wide receiver to win the Heisman Trophy in nearly 30 years. Alabama went undefeated and dominated the playoff. That season felt like the culmination of every previous adaptation. Recent seasons have reflected a new reality. The transfer portal, NIL, and national parity have reshaped the sport. Alabama no longer towers over everyone weekly, but it remains present, competitive, and dangerous every year. The dynasty didn't collapse. It stabilized in a more crowded landscape. What defines Alabama's modern dynasty is not a single era or style. It survived by changing before it had to. It endured by replacing comfort with evolution. It lasted because dominance was treated as temporary unless constantly defended. That is why this dynasty outlived every prediction of its end. Oklahoma Sooners, 1948 to 1958. Oklahoma's dynasty did not begin with flash. It began with structure, repetition, and patience. When Bud Wilkinson took over in the mid-1940s, Oklahoma was not a national power. The program had talent, but it lacked a system that could sustain success year after year. Wilkinson changed that by building something college football had never really seen before, a program that won through precision and continuity rather than star power.
By the late 1940s, the foundation was set. Oklahoma committed fully to the split tee offense, a scheme that emphasized timing, discipline, and execution over improvisation. Every player knew his assignment. Every practice reinforced the same principles. The goal was not to surprise opponents. It was to out-execute them until resistance disappeared. That approach took hold quickly. In 1950, Oklahoma won its first national championship of the era. The team was balanced, efficient, and ruthless with mistakes. It did not rely on explosive plays. It relied on controlling the game snap by snap. From that point forward, Oklahoma stopped being a regional power and became the sport's measuring stick. What followed was a run that still feels unreal. Between 1948 and 1957, Oklahoma won 47 consecutive games, a streak that remains the longest in college football history. Entire recruiting classes came and went without experiencing a loss. Opponents did not enter games hoping to win. They hoped to survive. The championships followed naturally. Oklahoma claimed national titles in 1950, 1955, and 1956, and finished at or near the top of the polls almost every year in between. But the dynasty wasn't defined by trophies alone. Wilkinson's teams were mentally suffocating. They rarely committed penalties. They rarely turned the ball over. They forced opponents to beat themselves through impatience and errors. The longer games went on, the more Oklahoma tightened its grip. By the mid-1950s, the dynasty had matured into something almost institutional. The players rotated, but the product stayed the same. New starters stepped into roles already perfected by those before them. There was no adjustment period. The system absorbed them. The streak finally ended in 1957, not because Oklahoma collapsed, but because sustaining perfection forever is impossible. Even then, the dynasty didn't abruptly stop. Oklahoma remained elite, continued winning conference titles, and stayed nationally relevant long after the streak ended. What made this dynasty special was dominance through repetition. Oklahoma proved that college football could be mastered through organization and discipline at a level no one else had attempted. The Sooners didn't overwhelm teams physically. They overwhelmed them mentally. This dynasty laid the blueprint for modern programs. Control the system, control the details, control the game. And for nearly a decade, no one could stop it. Notre Dame Fighting Irish, 1941 to 1949. Notre Dame's dynasty of the 1940s was built on national reach and absolute authority. By the time the 1940s began, Notre Dame was already a powerhouse. What separated this era from everything before it was how completely the program dominated the sport during a period of national uncertainty. While World War II disrupted college football everywhere else, Notre Dame remained stable, disciplined, and elite. The dynasty was shaped by Frank Leahy. Leahy took over in 1941 and immediately imposed structure. His teams were physical, fast, and meticulously coached. Notre Dame didn't rely on gimmicks. It relied on precision. Blocking angles, tackling fundamentals, and situational awareness were drilled relentlessly. The result was consistency at a time when most programs struggled to field experienced rosters. The impact was immediate. From 1941 through 1949, Notre Dame went undefeated 6 times. During that span, the Irish won 4 national championships and lost just 2 games total. Opponents didn't measure success by wins. They measured it by competitiveness. Notre Dame's advantage extended beyond the field. The program recruited nationally when most teams recruited locally. Players from across the country wanted to wear the gold helmet. Notre Dame's schedule brought them into stadiums nationwide, making them college football's most visible brand. Every game felt like a national event. Signature teams defined the era. The 1943 team went undefeated and unscored upon in multiple games. The 1946 squad featured dominant line play and one of the most balanced rosters of the decade. Each championship team looked slightly different, but the outcome stayed the same. What made this dynasty especially suffocating was its depth. While other programs rotated players out due to the war, Notre Dame maintained continuity. Coaching stability and player development allowed them to reload rather than rebuild.
The system didn't bend when circumstances changed. The run finally slowed near the end of the decade, not because the program declined, but because the rest of the sport began to modernize. Scholarships expanded, television exposure grew, parity slowly increased. Still, Notre Dame's 1940s dynasty set the standard for national dominance. It proved that a program could transcend region, circumstance, and era.
By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm.
Miami Hurricanes, 1983 to 1992. Miami's first great dynasty didn't grow quietly. It exploded. Before the early 1980s, Miami was an afterthought nationally. The program had moments, but no sustained identity. That changed when Howard Schnellenberger arrived and decided Miami would never try to out-tradition the sport's blue bloods. Instead, it would out-recruit them. Miami built its foundation on South Florida. The Hurricanes tapped into a talent pool that most programs ignored or underestimated. Speed, aggression, and confidence defined the roster. Miami didn't want to look like anyone else. It wanted to intimidate. The breakthrough came in 1983. Miami entered the season unranked and unafraid. Led by Bernie Kosar, the Hurricanes knocked off powerhouse after powerhouse before reaching the Orange Bowl against Nebraska. In a moment that defined the program's personality, Miami went for too late to secure the national championship instead of settling for a tie. They won, and college football took notice. That title changed everything. From that point forward, Miami wasn't chasing respect. It demanded it. The program embraced an edge that opponents hated and players fed off. Swagger became part of the uniform. As the decade progressed, Miami evolved but never softened. Under Jimmy Johnson, the Hurricanes became faster, deeper, and more ruthless. They overwhelmed teams with defensive speed and offensive explosiveness. The 1987 national championship team may have been the most physically intimidating college roster ever assembled. Even seasons without titles felt dominant. Miami consistently finished near the top of the polls, sent waves of players to the NFL, and turned big games into statements. Losses were rare. Blowouts were common. By the early 1990s, Dennis Erickson carried the dynasty forward. Miami won national championships in 1989 and 1991, proving the culture transcended coaching changes. The Hurricanes didn't just reload talent, they reloaded attitude. What separated this dynasty from others was its defiance. Miami thrived on being hated. Flags, trash talk, and celebrations became part of the spectacle. The program turned negativity into fuel, and opponents often unraveled emotionally before the fourth quarter. The run slowed in the early 1990s as sanctions, coaching turnover, and increased parity caught up. But by then, Miami had permanently altered the sport. This dynasty didn't just win championships. It changed how college football looked, felt, and sounded. Swagger became strategy. Confidence became weaponized. And for nearly a decade, Miami made the rest of the country play on its terms. Florida State Seminoles, 1987 to 2000. Florida State's dynasty was not built on short bursts of dominance. It was built on relentless consistency. When Bobby Bowden arrived in Tallahassee in the mid-1970s, Florida State was not a national power. By the late 1980s, it became the most dependable program in college football. The Seminoles didn't just win. They showed up every single year with the same expectations and met them almost every time. The turning point came in 1987. That season marked the beginning of an unprecedented run. Florida State finished in the top 5 of the final polls and never left that territory for the next 14 seasons. No other program in the modern era has matched that level of sustained excellence. Early on, the Seminoles were known for speed and offense. Quarterbacks like Charlie Ward brought precision and poise. The offense was fast, aggressive, and confident. Florida State wasn't overpowering teams physically the way Alabama did later. It overwhelmed them with tempo, talent, and execution. The 1993 season became the defining breakthrough. Florida State won its first national championship after years of near misses. Charlie Ward won the Heisman Trophy, and the Seminoles finally pushed past the label of being great but unlucky. That title validated everything Bowden had built. What followed was not a drop-off, it was reinforcement. Throughout the 1990s, Florida State lived in the title conversation. They won the ACC almost every year, reached national championship games repeatedly, and sent elite talent to the NFL at every position. The roster pipeline never dried up. The program adapted as college football changed. As offenses became more explosive nationally, Florida State matched them. As defenses got faster, Florida State stayed ahead. Recruiting remained elite, player development remained steady, and the system never wavered. The 1999 season marked the peak. Florida State went undefeated and won the national championship behind a complete roster that reflected everything the dynasty stood for. Speed, discipline, and confidence were embedded in every position group. It was the most polished version of Bowden's vision. By 2000, the run reached its natural end. Florida State remained elite, but the margin had shrunk. Parity increased, and the sport began shifting toward a new era of specialization and recruiting battles. Still, the standard Florida State set had already been written into history. This dynasty was never about being unbeatable. It was about being unavoidable. For 14 straight seasons, Florida State forced its way into every national conversation. Win or lose, they were there. No rebuilds, no resets, just sustained pressure. That level of consistency is what makes this run one of the greatest dynasties college football has ever seen. Army Black Knights, 1944 to 1949. Army's dynasty was forged under circumstances no other program has ever faced. During World War II, college football was fragmented. Rosters were depleted, schedules were unstable, and many programs struggled just to field teams. Army did not struggle. It dominated. The reason was simple. West Point became the gathering point for the nation's best young athletes who were also training to serve. The result was overwhelming. From 1944 to 1949, Army became the most powerful force in college football. The Black Knights went undefeated in 1944, 1945, and 1946, winning national championships in each of those seasons. During that stretch, they did not just beat opponents, they dismantled them. The peak came immediately. The 1944 and 1945 teams were nearly untouchable. Army overwhelmed opponents with speed, discipline, and execution that felt professional compared to the rest of the country. Their offense moved with precision, their defense swarmed, and mistakes were rare. Games were often decided early. Individual stars elevated the dynasty. Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis, known as Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside, formed one of the most devastating backfields the sport has ever seen. They combined power and speed in a way defenses simply could not handle. Blanchard won the Heisman Trophy in 1945, and Davis followed in 1946. Few programs have ever produced back-to-back Heisman winners, let alone during an undefeated championship run. Army's dominance extended beyond wins. They became a national symbol during wartime. Games were widely followed, and victories carried emotional weight beyond football. Army represented discipline, unity, and national pride at a moment when the country needed it. As the war ended, the landscape shifted. By the late 1940s, service commitments shortened playing careers, recruiting advantages faded, and other programs stabilized. Army remained competitive, but the unique conditions that fueled its dominance no longer existed. The dynasty ended not because of failure, but because the world changed. Army's run stands alone in college football history. No program has ever dominated under such extraordinary circumstances, and none ever will again. Nebraska Cornhuskers, 1993 to 1997. Nebraska's dynasty of the 1990s was built on inevitability. By the early 1990s, Tom Osborne had already turned Nebraska into a consistent power, but something was missing. The program kept reaching the top and falling just short. Close losses in championship moments defined the frustration. What followed was not a rebuild, but a breakthrough that unlocked one of the most dominant runs the sport has ever seen. That breakthrough arrived in 1993. Nebraska came within seconds of a national championship, losing a last-second game that hardened the program's edge. Instead of breaking confidence, the loss sharpened it. The roster was loaded with veterans, the system was perfected, and the hunger was obvious. From that point forward, Nebraska stopped letting games hang in the balance. The offense was built around the option, but it was unlike anything else in the country. Nebraska rotated linemen relentlessly, wore defenses down, and dominated fourth quarters. Opponents might survive early, they rarely survived late. The titles followed quickly. Nebraska won the national championship in 1994, validating years of near misses. In 1995, the dynasty reached its peak. That team went undefeated, won every game by at least 2 touchdowns, and is often considered the greatest college football team ever assembled. They didn't just beat opponents, they overwhelmed them. The dominance continued in 1996 and 1997. Even as personnel changed, the results stayed the same. Nebraska won another national championship in 1997, completing a run of 3 titles in 4 seasons. The roster pipeline never slowed. Speed, strength, and discipline remained constant. What separated Nebraska from everyone else was preparation. The program treated conditioning as a weapon. By the second half, opponents were exhausted. Nebraska was not. The system demanded physical sacrifice, and it rewarded endurance. The dynasty ended as the sport changed. Scholarship limits tightened. The option became harder to sustain nationally. Recruiting pipelines shifted. Tom Osborne retired after the 1997 championship, stepping away at the absolute peak. Nebraska never collapsed, but it never replicated this level again. This dynasty was about dominance through repetition, conditioning, and control. Nebraska turned physical football into an endurance test, and for 5 seasons, no one could pass it. Alabama Crimson Tide, 1961 to 1966. Alabama's first true dynasty was forged through discipline, identity, and restoration. When Bear Bryant arrived in Tuscaloosa in 1958, Alabama football was broken. The program had slipped badly, facilities were outdated, and player buy-in was fractured. Bryant's early seasons were brutal by design. He ran off players who weren't committed and rebuilt the roster around toughness and accountability. By the early 1960s, the transformation was complete. The breakthrough came in 1961. Alabama went undefeated and won the national championship, announcing itself as the sport's new standard. Bryant's teams were not flashy. They were controlled, physical, and fundamentally sound. Defense was the centerpiece, and mistakes were treated as fatal errors. The dominance continued immediately. The roster was deep, disciplined, and mentally tougher than its opponents. Alabama didn't overwhelm teams with speed. It broke them with precision. The 1964 and 1965 seasons extended the dynasty. Alabama won 2 more national championships, giving Bryant 3 titles in 5 seasons. These teams thrived on balance. The offense was efficient, the defense relentless, and special teams flawless. Alabama rarely beat itself, forcing opponents to play perfect football just to stay close. What made this run special was consistency. Year after year, Alabama looked the same. New starters stepped into roles that already existed. The expectations never changed. The standard never dipped. Players knew exactly what was required before they ever took the field. The 1966 season marked the end of the run. Alabama finished undefeated again, but tied in the Sugar Bowl, creating controversy over national title recognition. It was a fitting conclusion to a dynasty defined by control rather than spectacle. Even when challenged, Alabama refused to collapse. This era established Alabama's blueprint. Bryant proved that dominance could be manufactured through discipline and structure rather than innovation alone. The program didn't chase trends. It set expectations. Everything Alabama would become later traces back to this stretch. USC Trojans, 2002 to 2008. USC's dynasty was built on inevitability, star power, and total control of the sport's biggest stage. When Pete Carroll took over in 2001, USC was talented but unfocused. The program had underachieved for years despite recruiting advantages and national visibility. Carroll didn't overhaul everything. He simplified it. His philosophy centered on competition, confidence, and speed. USC didn't try to out-scheme opponents. It tried to overwhelm them. By 2002, the shift was already visible. USC went from inconsistent to commanding almost overnight. The defense swarmed. The offense played fast and fearless, and the roster began stacking elite talent year after year. The Trojans finished strong and entered the national conversation again. The dynasty truly ignited in 2003. USC dominated the season and finished ranked #1 in the AP poll, claiming a national championship despite the split title controversy. Regardless of official recognition, the message was clear. USC was the best team in the country. From there, the run escalated into complete control. In 2004, USC produced one of the most dominant teams in college football history. Led by Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, and a loaded defense, the Trojans went undefeated and crushed Oklahoma in the national championship game. They weren't just winning, they were dismantling elite programs with ease. The following seasons reinforced the dynasty's grip. USC won 34 consecutive games, a streak that spanned multiple seasons and included victories over top-ranked opponents in every major environment. The Coliseum became the sport's most intimidating venue. USC didn't just protect home field, it owned it. The style was as important as the results. USC played with confidence that bordered on arrogance, and opponents felt it. Recruits gravitated toward the program. Hollywood visibility, NFL development, and national dominance combined into a perfect storm. USC was setting cultural trends. The first crack came in 2005. USC reached the national championship undefeated again, but fell in an instant classic against Texas. The loss didn't erase the dynasty, but it exposed how narrow the margins had become. In 2006 and 2007, USC remained elite, but no longer untouchable. Injuries, quarterback turnover, and rising parity chipped away at the edge. The Trojans were still winning conference titles, still producing NFL stars, but the sense of inevitability began to fade. By 2008, the dynasty had reached its conclusion. USC was still powerful, still relevant, but the sport had changed. Scholarship limits tightened, competition widened, and the gap USC once exploited narrowed. The program remained a heavyweight, but the stranglehold was gone. What defined USC's dynasty was not just championships, it was presence. It was star power. It was control of the sport's biggest moments. For nearly a decade, college football revolved around USC. If you wanted the throne, you had to go through Los Angeles. Miami Hurricanes, 2000 to 2003. Miami's second dynasty was not built over time. It detonated all at once. At the end of the 1990s, Miami football was barely holding itself together. NCAA sanctions had stripped scholarships, depth was thin, and the program was fighting to stay relevant. But beneath the surface, elite talent was quietly stacking. Players recruited during the down years were maturing together, and what followed was one of the most talent-dense stretches college football has ever seen. The explosion came in 2000. Miami finished the regular season undefeated and reached the Sugar Bowl, only to lose a controversial national championship game to Florida State. That loss became fuel. It hardened the roster and unified a locker room that already believed it was better than everyone else. That belief became reality in 2001. The 2001 Hurricanes are widely considered the greatest team in college football history. The roster was absurd. Future NFL stars filled every position group. The defense was violent, fast, and interchangeable. The offense was balanced and explosive. Miami didn't just beat teams, it embarrassed elite programs. That season ended with the dismantling of Nebraska in the Rose Bowl for the national championship. The game was over early. The message was unmistakable. No one was close. What made this dynasty different was depth. Miami rotated future NFL starters freely. If one player went down, another equally dangerous replacement stepped in. Practices were more competitive than games. The internal competition sharpened everything. The dominance carried into 2002. Miami entered the season riding a massive winning streak and returned to the national championship game again. They were seconds away from repeating as champions before a late pass interference call extended the game for Ohio State. Miami eventually lost in double overtime, snapping the aura of invincibility, but not the dynasty itself. By 2003, the final chapter unfolded. Miami remained loaded and dangerous, but the edge had dulled slightly. Coaching changes, early departures to the NFL, and the weight of expectations began to take their toll. The Hurricanes finished the season at number 5, but did not claim another title. And just like that, it was over. The roster was picked clean by the NFL. Depth evaporated. Sanctions still lingered. The dynasty had burned too bright and too fast to sustain itself longer. What defines this run is not longevity, it is concentration. Never before had so much elite talent existed in one place at the same time. Miami's swagger wasn't manufactured. Opponents felt it during warm-ups. Games were often decided by halftime. This dynasty didn't reshape strategy or systems. It reshaped intimidation. For a brief window, Miami wasn't chasing anyone. It stood alone, daring the rest of college football to survive 4 quarters. No one did.
If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching.